Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Casterly, Rock 2094 AC. Jon, 3 times he had lost in the last 3 days. Lorziers, Brienne, and Cregan all had beaten him far too easily. His arm was healed, but he was out of practice. He was slower. His moves far too predictable. As he sat on wall overlooking Brienne beating Cregan, he heard Walder speaking to Jurs and tried not to listen in, but hearing his name, he couldn't help himself. "He's missing her, that's all," Walder said softly. "Aye, he is, though I didn't think it'd affect his spars. Daeron says a clear mind is needed, and Jon's mind is not clear. Give him time. He'll be back up to speed soon." He'd have liked to agree with them, but it was more than just missing Marguerite that was clouding his mind. It was Rhaegar. It was not being able to speak to his dragon, not being able to talk to him as he did Rhaenys. At times in his head he'd hear him calling for him, then it was as if a door opened and he could speak, he could reassure his son, but on other occasions, it was like being shut out and he didn't understand it. Sorella too was having more difficulty with his son. While she couldn't understand what Rhaenys said, they could communicate, they could to some degree understand each other. Lokut Baron was like a mystery to her, he was aggressive too, and Sorella had been scratched so much that she'd started to keep her arms covered more often than not. Along with missing Marguerite and his sister and the dragon problem, was the fact that Jorah too was taking their departures badly. Trying to explain that they needed to go, that she'd see them again, but not for some time, was hard. As he could tell, she felt a little abandoned. She had liked having friends at the Rock, since the first problem was one of distance and couldn't be solved as of yet, and the second was one he had no idea of how to go about solving. He decided to concentrate on the last, and so instead of taking part in the spar he should have, he left in search of Jaina. "Cregan, take my place against Loras, will you? I've something I need to do," he shouted, and his cousin smiled. Moving to fight against his friend, he found her going over household expenses with Daisy and Jaime. All of them surprised to see him. He had noticed how Jaime spent even more time with Daisy since her illness, but was glad to see her looking well. "Jon, is everything all right?" Jaime asked. "Aye, it is, my lord. I wish to speak to Lady Jaina about Joy." "Joy?" Jaina asked. "She's not been herself since Sansa and Margaery left, my lady. I think she missed having girls here, friends. I was wondering, is there anything that can be done about it?" Jaina sat quietly for a moment and then smiled, which made Jon feel relieved. She had come up with an idea, one he hoped would work well for Joy. "We could gather some girls for her. It's very early to have ladies around her. But no, this would be good for her. Yes. Leave it to me, Jon." He nodded and turned to leave, but Daisy looked to Jaime, who nodded, and then he was asked to stay for a moment. "Jon, Daisy and I have some news," Jaime said. "I'm with child," Daisy said, a large smile on her face. "My lady, my lord, I'm incredibly happy for you both, truly," he said, seeing clearly now what Daisy's illness was. But then he thought of his own birth, of Jaime's mother's death, and his grandmother's experiences at the hands of the Maester. His face darkened, and Jaime noticed and immediately realized what he was thinking. "We've taken steps, Jon. Kevin is hiring some healers from Essos to bring over. Some were recommended to him from our contacts over there. Daisy will have the very best of care. Don't worry." Jaime said, and Jon nodded, his relief clear. "I'm sorry, my lord, I didn't mean to." "No, Jon, it's good you worry. It means a lot to me, knowing you care so," Daisy said. He felt a lot better as he walked back to his room. Ghost was even more constant by his side now that Dusk was with Cregan, his cousin being overjoyed the day he'd gone to speak to him with the Black Wolf. Cregan had settled in quickly, Ashara a little less so. Arthur had suggested she take on tutor duties for Joy, and while that and seeing her son with Jon helped her some, it seemed to him there was a sense of sadness that surrounded the woman. He had spoken to her of his uncle, and it was clear she still missed him, still loved him. Jon wondered what that was like, to lose the love of your life and be forced to carry on. To need to carry on for the sake of a child. Would his own mother have felt the same? Would she, too, have been sad so many years later if she was here? Would she resent him, hate him, see him as a reminder of what she lost? As he entered his room, those thoughts were cleared from his head. Quickly, though. "Father," he heard it clear in his head, and looked to his son. He was there, on the ground, and something was very wrong. Jon rushed to the bronze dragon. Sorella was leaning over it with Rhaenys chirping, worriedly beside her. He picked his son up and looked into his eyes. He went looking for the door and found it closed firmly. "Please, son, let me in. Please let me in," he said in a panicked voice, and then he was there. The door was wide open and he was inside. The mind of a dragon was unlike anything he could imagine. He had warged into many animals. With Rhaenys he had never fully done so, feeling it wrong somehow, and instead it had been more a connection he'd formed. With Ghost it was something far different. He was a welcome guest in his wolf's mind, a favored visitor, and Ghost made room for him. Here in Ligeron's, it was like being in a wild open wilderness. He was lost and needed direction. He saw the light then in the distance, and so he walked to it, finding a tower he knew all too well, though this time there were people moving about. He saw Arthur, and a man with a black bat on his armor. Oswald, Sir Oswald. Jon smiled sadly, thinking of one of his first protectors. He passed them and walked up the stairs, finding the door open, and walked inside, seeing his father and mother laying on the bed, his father's hand resting on his mother's swollen stomach. "He is resting, my love. Don't disturb him," his mother said. "I shall try not, though I long to hold him in mine own arms, to see his face." "As do I. Do you really have to go?" his mother asked worriedly. "My father commands it. They march Lyanna, your brother, Robert, Jon Arryn. They march, and should they not be stopped, I fear for Aelia and the children. Should I not march to stop them, I fear for what my father would do to punish them." "Be safe, my love. Come back to me. Come back to us," his mother said, kissing his lips. Jon found himself outside, his father mounting up on his horse. He and his guards ready to leave. Sichreld had joined Arthur and Oswell, and while he wished to look upon the white bull, his eyes were drawn to his father. He rode to his death, and he in some way was part of the cause. But seeing him smiling, seeing how hopeful he was, Jon felt the cruelty of what was to come even more. As his father turned to ride off, he shouted after him, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Father, don't go, don't go." His father looked back, almost as if he heard him. But he turned and rode on, and Jon fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Why? Why show me this? Why let me see?" The roar was loud, and he turned to the tower, the bronze dragon flying over it, feeling its eyes on as he turned as it landed. "Time is a river, father. You must learn how to sail it." The dragon said, "How?" "Use it, use what you have. The magic in your blood is the wind. It will power the ship to allow you sail." "Ship? Magic needs a focus. A conduit. You have what you need. Use it, use them. Learn to sail, father, for in time you'll have need of it." He woke up on the floor. How long he'd been out for, he didn't know. He heard his sister's voice and heard Sorella, and while both were concerned, they weren't overly worried, so he doubted it was for long. "Why did you do that?" he heard Rhaegar say, while Rhaegar chirped back. "What do you mean? It wasn't you?" More chirps from Rhaegar. "What gods?" "Ray, I'm unharmed," Jon said, stroking both dragons. Rhaegar's chirps the same happy ones that Rhaegar would make. Once he'd reassured his sister and had calmed her and Sorella down. Once he'd ensured Rhaegar felt no ill effects from what they'd shared. His dragon's happy chirping proving that, he stood up and walked to the chest. Taking out the glass candles, he held the green one in his hand. Looking at it, he remembered what he'd been told. It was time to learn how to sail through time. Closing his eyes, he heard the gasp from Sorella as it lit up, and the louder gasp as she saw her father and Tyrion speaking to a man with a broken nose. "How?" she asked, and Jon said nothing as the images changed. Arya drawing a bow and shooting a target, while an older woman looked on approvingly. Robb sailing on a pinnacle ship laughing at Ser Wendell. Richard speaking to a woman in a shack, while a man stood guard. Cregan and Loras fighting to a draw as Arthur watched. Joy being taught by Ashera as Jurian stood at the door smiling. When he saw Sansa and Fang speaking to Will as he felt his heart race as Margaery and Lyanette walked by. He tried to concentrate, tried to see more of her, but the images changed and flashed even more. He gasped as he let go, and had to steady himself before falling to the floor. Once he did, he put the glass candle back and walked before falling onto his bed. He was asleep in moments, drained completely. He would need to train, just like with his sword. Just like with his studies, he would need to train. Tyrion told him a mind needed books, like a sword needed whetstones. If so, then what did magic need? What did it require? Highgarden 2094 AC. Olenna. Arriving back in Highgarden, she couldn't wait to get started. There were things to do, and while she'd leave the settling in of Sansa to her granddaughter and her good daughter, she could get on with the important work. So instead, she at once went to Mace's solar first, not surprised in the least to see he was organizing a feast to welcome them home, as if that in itself was a huge achievement. Once he saw her, though, he quickly ignored what to him just moments earlier had been the most important work ever and began to speak on actual things of importance, much to her relief. "I sent the new offer to Lord Stark, Mother," he said, looking to her. "Which was?" "A quarter discount and the opportunity to do more business in the future," he said. And she nodded. He had done well. "The crown?" "We've received no reply, Mother." "None? Not even from the Hand or Master of Coin?" "None at all." That was surprising. She had expected Jon Arryn to try something, to demand something. Still best that it happened while she was here herself, rather than Mace had received it while she was not. She tried not to chuckle at the panic he'd have gone through. "Anything else I need to know?" "A letter from Renly Baratheon, suggesting he may come visit in the near future if that's acceptable, Mother." "Did you reply?" "I did. I told him he'd be more than welcome." Mace said, and something was off about how he said it. "Mace?" she said, and watched him gulp. "I just thought that perhaps since we're not looking at Prince Tommen, that maybe Lord Rensley and Margaery would hit it off. He's Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, Mother, the king's own brother, and a man who'd have no interest in bedding Margaery under any circumstances whatsoever," she thought, though said nothing. "We will not be betrothing Margaery to anyone for a long time, Mace. Do you understand?" "Mother," he said indignantly. "A long time, Mace. Well, after she's flowered. Do you understand?" "I do," he huffed, as he turned to walk out the door before stopping. "Mother, the bastard. He's a good lad and all, but a bastard all the same. Is it wise he's so friendly with Margaery?" "That boy will be a powerful ally in the future, and he is his father's son. Margaery will be perfectly safe with him, Mace," she said, and Mace nodded, a smile on his face as he left. She found her grandson speaking to Margaery about the direwolf, and she shook her head. Had Sansa Stark just been a ward, then Olenna may not have allowed her to bring the beast here with her. But after seeing Ghost and knowing how Jon felt about the wolves and that it was he who gave her the animal, things were very different. She waited until her grandson had finished speaking to Margaery, and then signaled for him to follow. It was time to find out what had happened while she was away. "You're looking well, grandmother. A good journey?" "Very," she said, as they walked into her solar and took a seat. "Now, tell me what I've missed." "Where do you wish me to start? Here or Essos?" "You found the dragons?" she asked curiously. "No, but I found news of them. Are you sure about Viserys, grandmother? From my reading, he seems far too much like Joffrey or his grandfather. I'd not like to see him anywhere near my sister," Willis said, a look of disgust on his face. She couldn't help it. She laughed and laughed for quite a bit of time, so much so that Willis began to look at her strangely, worriedly. "Grandmother, if only I'd had this knowledge before I went west, I'd have felt less of a fool." "Grandmother?" he asked, confused. "Move closer, Willis. There's something you should know." She told him then, all of it, Jon, who he really was, the Maesters, and then she told him of her agreement with the Lannisters, of the real reason for her removing their support from Robert. "What if they try and play us false, grandmother, use our support, but don't give us the marriage? We have nothing to fear there. Willis Margaery will be queen. On that, I'm certain. But, I don't understand it. If the boy knows he's king, then why keep the betrothal secret from him? This won't be just a political alliance, Willis. You've seen the presents the king has sent your sister. Speak to her of him just once, and you'll see how she feels about him. If you spoke to Jon, you'd see the same. They will decide to marry even if we had not already agreed to it. The Lannisters have no desire for their own blood on the throne. Lord Jaime loves the king as if he was his own son. Willis, trust me on this. For the first time in years, we may end up with a good man on the throne," she said. "And a good woman," he said, and she nodded. "Now, what else should I know?" He told her then of the strange events in the Riverlands of Sir Brynden and Lady Catelyn both making their way to River Run. She knew it then. Her suspicions were correct. She hoped whoever the Lannisters used was aware of this. Her immediate reaction was to send a raven, but she could not until they knew of Lomis's loyalty. "We need to do something with our letters." "Willis, until we know more. We need to assume Lomi is not to be on our side. Tarly's maester is certainly involved. But we need to know if we can trust our own. And I'll not risk him on anything until I do. We can bring in Eleonora from the town. She's a healer, a good one. If we're not sure of Lomis, she can help. As for the letters, I may be able to do something with the hawks. but it'll take time. Do it. If we can take control of sending our own letters, it can only be of benefit. Speaking of Tarly, I had a disturbing rumor about his son, Willis said. Samuel or Dickens, she asked. Samuel, he said before continuing. Apparently he was beaten in a spar so badly that Tarly had him dressed and paraded in his mother's clothing, just to teach him to be a man. The boy's not cut out for fighting, but he has a keen mind, grandmother, very keen. Out with it, she said, looking at him. What? You have an idea. What is it? I was thinking, I spoke with him briefly on Marjorie's last name day. He wished to become a maester, but knew his father would never pay for his studies. Perhaps if we were to do so, he'd be grateful. She looked at him and almost grinned inside. Thank the gods, it skipped a generation. If he and Margieri had not come along, she'd have been stuck with more maces. Marjorie has a name-day feast coming up soon. See to it that the lad is there. I'll speak to him myself to be certain, but an ally in the Citadel that we can trust would be an asset. As you say, grandmother, Willis said, standing up to leave. Oh, and speak to Lady Sansa. Make her feel welcome, she said, and Willis glared at her. Grandmother, she's a child. As were we all once, speak to her of the direwolf if she has nothing else of interest to you, she said, seeing her grandson's curiosity rising. As you command, grandmother, he said smugly, though this she allowed to pass. Old Town 2094 AC. Tyrion. Spending weeks in Old Town with Oberyn Martell really was tiring. During the day, he found the prince like him, loved to read. They had gone to the Citadel as visitors, and while allowed access to only certain books, he had been in his element. It surprised him that Oberyn too seemed to have a thirst for knowledge. What was even more surprising, though, had been the way their welcome seemed to go from friendly to not all of a sudden. One day they were barely being looked at, and then the next he found that certain masters stared at them with suspicion. Certain masters went out of their way to be in the library when they were there. When Satan brought him the note one evening from Marwyn, they found the reason why. Jaime had informed the masters of Craylin's death, and so people wondered about them. That it was only certain ones showed to him that not all the masters were aware of certain things, not all involved. Ah, Lord Tyrion, an interesting tome. Don't you think? Our Maester Ibros said, looking at the book he was reading. Maester Acklard's History of the Great Houses. Indeed, Archmaester, though nothing I've not read before. Another who wishes access to higher learning. Forge a link, like your friend there, and you, too, shall be allowed access. Ibros joked as he walked away. That man is an idiot, Oberyn said, smirking. Perhaps that's the secret of how to become an Archmaester. Only idiots need apply, Tyrion said, laughing. If days were spent reading, then how they spent their nights was learning in a very different capacity. By the end of their first moon they had, he assumed at least, sampled every brothel and every worthy whore in Old Town. Oberyn's appetites only surpassed it seemed by Alaria's. He had even been invited to share a bed with the prince and his paramour, and while the offer was tempting, he had no wish to either insult the prince by being with his love or by not being with himself, so he declined. The boy Saturn he found to be a godsend, quick and witty when pushed, quiet and respectful when not. He delivered messages to and from Marvin, to and from Ellaria to Oberyn, and from himself to the prince when they were not together. He had learned he had been born in a brothel, had been raised up and sold to men for a number of years already, even at the tender age he was, and that was giving him pause. Their time here was almost up. Marvin would give them what he learned, and they'd move on. But what to do about the boy? Satin. My lord? Do you wish to go back to the brothel? I have no choice, my lord. Where else am I to go? If a place could be found for you, a role more suited would it be to your liking? He asked, seeing the boy look at him curiously. My lord, I find myself in need of a page, a squire or steward. Would it interest you? He asked, and the boy's eyes lit up for a moment, but then just as quickly faded. My lord, a man such as yourself cannot have someone like me in your employ. It would not be seemly. Do I look like I care of what is seemly, lad? He said, laughing. Let me worry on that. Would it interest you? Greatly, my lord, Satin said. That night he paid the brothel owner 3 gold dragons for the boy, feeling sick to his stomach to do so, but the boy was free now, and his life would be better. It wasn't as if he would be a slave or need to whore himself out. Oberyn laughed at him when he told him, but Ellaria looked at him fondly. Satin was like her a bastard, a flowers not a sand but her brother. All the same, and he knew had he not already been in her favor, he'd have made a friend with this act alone. They met with Marwyn in the old woman's house the next day, and Tyrion was glad she herself wasn't there. She had spooked him with her thoughts on Jon, something which they now knew Marwyn himself had figured out. He left it to Oberyn to decide if the mage could be trusted knowing what he did, and should the need arise, he knew the Dornish prince wouldn't hesitate to do what needed to be done. Ah, the Giant of Casterly Rock and the Prince of Vipers. What good company the mage keeps now, the man said, laughing as they entered. What have you found? Oberyn asked, irritated. Much, but not enough. These men keep their secrets well. Names I have but few outside these walls, and not enough inside. Some I can swear by, though, which should add to your list of 4. Who? Miles, Lomas, Veman are good men. You can be assured they're not directly involved. Kill out it, Oberyn said, and Marwyn shook his head, and Tyrion reached a hand to calm him down. Your maester is a good friend of Theobald's. They studied together and keep in touch often. My brother's illness? I do not know if they caused it, my prince, but Miles should be placed in charge of his treatments. All his treatments, Marwyn said. Who else? Theobald, obviously, and Walgrave too, though the old fool is barely sure what he's done. Theobald may lead them now, but I wonder on some of the others. I have no proof, you see. I need more time. Outside, Coleman, Kalot, Creelin, you know of. Crescent too. Arden, Paxel, obviously. There are more, but I need more time. I need more time. Tyrion, though, was dumbfounded. The Vale, Dragonstone, Casterly Rock, Sunspear, King's Landing, almost all the great houses, and then he began to wonder, why not Highgarden and Storm's End? Why not the North again? I don't understand it, Storm's End, he said, and Marwyn shook his head. Highgarden? The North? What about them? Oberyn asked. These masters, they are almost in all of the great houses. The North had Wallace until Luwin arrived. Luwini's is at Highgarden. The master at Storm's End. Jern, Marwyn said. How are they not part of this? Why are they different? Marwyn sat silently, and then he looked at them, a smile on his face. Timing Lord Tyrion, Timing Luwin was named in 2082. Journey to? Lomis, some years earlier, but in 2082, Archmaester Lardis was the seneschal he would have had final say on the appointments. They mustn't have been in the position to challenge, he said, before suddenly looking up at them. Those crafty bastards. What? Oberyn asked. They changed the rules. The seneschal used to be yearly. When Theobald moved for it, they made it a life appointment. They must have realized their folly. So now they handle the appointments? Tyrion asked. The seneschal does. Oh, this is too good. Your new maester. I've seen the man they wish. Trust me, my lord. That's the last person we need. Anywhere near the prince. I shall handle this personally. Inform your brother, my lord, should any other maester than Jardine arrive. Then trust him not. If it's Jardine, Tyrion asked, then trust him as much as you would me. We don't trust you. Oberyn said, and Marwyn laughed. Good. The prince must be safe. I've done what I can for now. I shall keep in touch if I'm successful. If not, Oberyn asked, then mourn my passing, for I shall be dead. He got up and got ready to leave. I almost forgot, Lomora, you can find him in Pentos. He works as a healer there. A good man. Bring him home if you can. No man will serve the prince better than he. River Run, 2094 AC. The Blackfish. Standing watching while his nephew missed the first arrow was annoying. When he missed the second, it was embarrassing. By the third, it was downright shameful. He stepped forward, grabbed the bow, and lit the arrow. Then without looking, the Blackfish fired, hitting the boat which carried his brother's body. He turned and walked away, leaving the new Lord of Riverrun to stew in his shame. That's if the boy even felt any. Finding the Maester, his niece and nephew, standing over the body of his brother had been a shock. Seeing the lack of grief on his nephew's face, a worry at least his niece had shown her own, which relieved him some. He had known his brother was ill, had heard enough about it for his coughing, when he arrived, not to be a surprise, but that he had died not long after they had spoken about the future, was both a shock and suspicious to him. That his nephew was showing so little sadness at the passing of his father was something which sent his mind into areas he'd rather not delve into. I'm sorry for your loss, old friend, Jane said, walking up to him. I thank you, Jonas. Come, I find myself in dire need of a drink, he said. Both men walked into the hall. He and Jonas took a seat beside Lord Jason Lannister, Lord Raymond Derry, and Lady Shellowin. Thankfully, the Freys had deemed it important to sit closer to the high table, and while he caught his niece and nephew looking at him over the course of the night, he found he cared not. Instead, he drank and spoke of memories of his brother with people who actually respected him, people who had known Hoster to be a good man despite his faults. "So what's next for you, Brennan? Will you be coming back to help run the Riverlands?" Lord Jason asked. "No, I'll be heading back to the Vale as soon as I can," he answered, and saw each of the four at the table look to each other, worried looks on their faces. "Spit it out, Jason," he said, looking to the Lannister Lord. "Your nephew is not suited to be Lord Brynden, certainly not Lord Paramount," Jason said, and he caught the others agreeing with him. "Shella," he said, asking his kin. "Jason has the truth of it, Brynden. The boy is far too impetuous, far too concerned with how he looks. That affair in King's Landing is proof enough of that. No matter that others tried to talk him out of it," he carried on. "A lord that won't accept counsel is a poor one, and I fear for us under his stewardship. He's the Lord of Riverrun by all rights of gods and men, Lord Paramount too. Speaking out against him won't do any good," he said, shaking his head. "No, but it needs to be said, this thing with the young lad, Snow, it worries me, Brynden. It worries me greatly," Jono said. "You think he'd try to do something to the lad?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "He already did here, and in King's Landing," Raymond said, his voice angry. "The boy was attacked by bandits here, and King's Landing was just a drunken affair. Not the next morning, it wasn't. He was sober in the hall when he tried to take the lad's hand. As for the attack here, they were no more bandits than I'm afraid," Raymond said. "You're speaking on your liege, Raimion," he said angrily. "Aye, but none of it's lies, Brendan, you know this. Otherwise you'd have punched me in the face by now." "I still might," he said, and Shella and Jonas chuckled. "Stay a bit, Brendan. At least see what his plans are. Should any of us ask, he'd likely not tell us. But you're his uncle, he'd not keep them from you." Lord Jason said, "And what would you have me do? As I said, he's the Lord. I have no power here." "It's not to do with power, old friend. I'm telling you this because of how far back we go. But should he call my banners, he may not get them." Jiaches. "You'd refuse the call?" he asked, stunned. "I am, and I'm not the only one. Oh, don't get me wrong. For a just cause, I'll rally. But I fear that we may be forced into something which is far from just." He couldn't believe what he was hearing, listening to the others as they spoke. It seemed as if at least 4 of his nephew's most important bannermen seemed disinclined to accept him as their liege. Over the course of the night, it got far worse. His nephew insulted both Lord Jason's son Petrek and Raymond Derry, so much so that they left. Lord Jason following after his son, all because they dared to go to the wedding of Jaime Lannister. He also caught the Freys whispering amongst themselves on more than one occasion. Cat, on the other hand, was a gracious host. She moved and worked the room expertly, and while she didn't negate all his nephew's damage, she did stop it from going much further. By the end of the night, though it was clear, he would have no choice but to stay on for far longer than he had hoped. Laying down in his bed that night, he dreamt of his brother, calling him, trying to tell him something. He tossed and turned in the night, trying to get some rest, but his sleep was fitful, to say the least. The next morning, he broke his fast alone. His nephew had slept on, and Kat had gotten up early to go over the household, to see if there were any need for more or less servants, and to make sure stocks and supplies were up to date. He found himself walking the corridors, ending up standing outside his nephew's room, thinking back to the morning he'd been called, the morning they found his brother's body. 1 week earlier. He stood looking at Kat as she sobbed hysterically, at Edmure as he stood there, a blank expression on his face. Vaemond knelt over Hoster's body, and he found himself wondering why. Why had his brother come here? Why go to Edmure's room in the middle of the night? The conversations he had with his brother were fresh in his mind, and for this to happen now, it just rang false. When the maester stepped up, though, he made it clear it was not unexpected, that the illness was far worse than his brother had let on. I tried to have him rest more, to take things easy, but he refused to listen. Had he done so, would it made a difference? He asked. Some Sir Brynden, but the nature of the illness, the shortness of breath, it could have caught him any time. Veerman replied. Why was he here? He asked, looking to Edmure. He wished to speak to me of something, but before he could, the coughing began. I tried to help, I tried, Edmure said, and Brynden nodded, looking back to his brother. Now, as he stood there looking down on the ground, he wondered on certain things. His nephew had moved immediately. The Lord's rooms, and at the time he had thought nothing of it. thinking he'd rather be anywhere than in these rooms after seeing this, but now he wasn't sure. Was there more to it? Was he worried there was something in Hoster's rooms, something he didn't wish found? I know, but he's my own son. What am I supposed to do? Brynden found himself going back over and over the last conversation he had with his brother, trying to think on every sentence, every word, trying to see if he'd forgotten something, if he'd missed something. Had his brother intended to do something about Edmure? Had he gone to his room to do or say something? And if he had, what did that mean? Was he actually contemplating what he thought he was? Was he really thinking his nephew a kinslayer? Uncle, there you are. Edmure is looking for us both, Cat said, drawing him from his thoughts. Oh, sorry, I was miles away, he said, shaking his head. I know, it's hard just thinking of him, knowing he's not here anymore, she said, wiping her eyes. Come, we better not keep the Lord waiting, she said with half a smile. Entering into his brother's, no, nephew's solar, he fought the thoughts that were in his head. Luckily, Edmure was about to give him other things to focus on. Can you believe Darry and Lannister last night? How dare they treat their lord with such disrespect? Edmure, Cat said chidingly. No, Cat, they were out of order. Who do they think they are? Edmure said, his face in a sneer. You are the disrespectful one, and should you not change then, you'll have no bannerman to call upon, he said, and Edmure glared at him while Cat looked perturbed before she spoke. What do you mean, Uncle? This Jon Snow stuff, it needs to stop and stop now. Your bannermen are discussing it, and I'm going to say this once more to be clear. I'll not be a party to it, so should you wish to keep them and me in your corner, it ends now, he said, looking at Edmure, who grew red in the face, and at Cat, who nodded and then reached out to touch Edmure's arm. Very well, Edmure said, and Brynden breathed a sigh of relief. Aye, very well, Cat said. Now, Uncle, as for why I asked to see you, I need your help. Actually. You have it, just name it, he said, relieved that Jon Snow seemed to be forgotten about. I need to travel to King's Landing to swear to the king, and Cat has asked to come with me, while I could leave Otherides' Castellan. I think family would present a better appearance, Edmure said. Aye, it wouldn't do otherwise. Fine. I'll stay until you come back, he said, and Edmure and Cat smiled at him. Then we'll leave on the morrow. It's a long way, and I'd see us back as soon as we can. The Lady Joanna 29-4 AC, Tyrion, he had sent Satin, some guards and letters to Jaime and Jon in Casterly Rock. Originally, he had simply planned to travel back himself, but Oberyn had convinced him, and in the end, he had agreed to join him on the trip to Pentos. Though whether it was for the same reasons or whether he just wished to see Essos, he couldn't tell. Now, though they were getting ready to stop off in Dorne, he would soon get to meet Prince Doran and see firsthand how he reacted to the news of Jon's true identity. They had passed Salt Shore and Lemonwood and would soon be docking in Sunspear. He would get to meet Doran's children before traveling on to the Water Gardens and meeting the prince himself. Oberyn seemed very eager to see his brother again, very eager to see Caleoud and Miles, though if Tyrion were to guess it was for very different reasons. We are almost there, my friend. I am looking forward to showing you the delights of my homeland, Oberyn said with a smirk. I thought this was purely a business trip, he japed. All work and no play makes Oberyn a very dull boy. Tyrion, I'd have thought our times in Old Town would have shown you that. Illyria said, kissing Oberyn on the lips. Aye, that it did. I'm not stopping off in Lyce, though, he said a little more seriously. You lions, you're no fun at all, Oberyn said, laughing as they saw the docks of Sunspear come into view. Standing there waiting for them was a large contingent. Though he was surprised to see no royals, apparently they were expecting a Lannister. Not a Martell, he looked forward to their surprise at both. His guards carried only a small trunk with his changes of clothing. Even his books would be left on board while he traveled to meet Doran. When the guards did see Prince Oberyn, he laughed as one quickly ran back through the city towards the keep. Immediately the carriages were called for, and he, Oberyn, and Ellaria were escorted to the seat of House Martell. The old palace was incredible to look at, he thought as they neared it, rising almost out of the sand itself, its spear tower rising high in the sky. Welcome home, my prince, Tyrion heard a voice say, and looked to see Sir Daemon and Prince Oberyn's daughters walking towards the carriage when it stopped. Sir Daemon, everything is well. It is my prince. It seems our own gift was added to one previously given. Sir Marbury Lorch suffered exactly as we were told, Sir Daemon said, looking to Tyrion and nodding. My nephew did the work himself. I look forward to seeing the results. Is it here? It is. Both he and the mountain have been given pride of place I'm sure you'll enjoy what our prince did with them. Ser Manfrey said as he led the rest of the party toward them. Lord Tyrion, may I present my nephew Prince Quentyn, and my niece the heiress of Dorne, Princess Arianne. Oberyn said as a small frog-faced boy and a girl who was anything but made their way towards him. Why is there a Lannister here? Quentyn said, a look of disgust on his face. Lord Tyrion is a guest of our uncle, and will be treated with the same respect and welcome he gave our family in Lannisport. Quentyn, is that understood? Princess Arianne said, smiling at him. The boy just huffed. Not that he paid too much attention to him. Instead, he found himself looking at a woman who took his breath away, a woman who surprisingly wasn't much taller than he was. Arianne was quite simply a beauty. She was buxom and curvaceous, and used it to her advantage, her dress both revealing and not. When she caught him looking, he expected to see some disgust, but was surprised to find none. If anything, it made her flirt even more. Now shall we head inside? I'm sure our guest would enjoy a drink, Lord Tyrion, if you'd accompany me, she said, holding out her arm for him to take. The difference in height was both a blessing and not for him. More used to having to escort far taller women to feasts and balls, he always felt foolish as they had to bend down to allow him to take their arm. With Arianne, though, she didn't need to bend at all. As he turned to speak to her, he found his eye level was directly in line with her chest, where he soon found out that her nipples were large and dark brown and not at all covered as she moved. Enjoying the view, my lord, she said flirtatiously, as she smiled while showing him the golden dome of the Tower of the Sun. It's an unexpected delight, princess. I find myself longing to explore it more thoroughly, he said, looking directly at her before pointing to the colored glass windows. Not many people get to explore it directly. Why should you be any different? She asked, raising an eyebrow and smirking at him. Not many would appreciate it as much as I, nor take the time to fully enjoy it, to relish it, to fully immersive themselves in it, he said, and she smiled as they reached their destination. Up ahead was the throne room, and ahead of them a dais. 2 seats were placed on it, both identical to the eye, and he watched as Arianne walked and sat on one, her dress revealing a lot of her leg as she did so. Uncle, please sit beside me. You'll enjoy the view that much better, Arianne said playfully, and Oberyn took the seat beside her. Tyrion looked on as she pointed in the distance, and then Oberyn laughed loudly, forcing him to turn and look. Hanging above the door was the mountain's head, and beside it, Lorchie's and another he didn't recognize. In the mountain and Lorchie's open mouths were what could only be their manhoods. It was an imposing and funny sight. He joined in with the rest of them, laughing as drinks were brought, the Dornish wine a welcome respite after the Abergold he'd been drinking the last couple of moons. After a few glasses, though, he wished to change before the meal that night, and was surprised when Arianne herself accompanied him to his room. They were standing outside, and he was just about to enter when she looked at him, her tongue licking her lip to make it wet. I was wondering if you really are the littlest lion, she said suddenly, her hand reaching out and touching his groin. Apparently not. This is good to know. Perhaps if you're a good lion, I'll hear you roar, she said, walking away from him. He looked at her, the fullness of her arse as impressive a sight as the chest he'd been staring at as she touched him. Turning to walk into his room, his stiffness making his breeches feel tighter, he sighed. It could never be you, fool, he thought as he closed the door behind him. Highgarden 2094 AC, Olenier. Making preparations for Margaery's name day celebration was interrupted twice. Firstly by the letter from Jon Arryn, and then by the visit of Baelor Hightower. The first she had been expecting, and it was potentially a problem. The second was only a surprise because of the letter Baelor carried. Sitting in her solar, she waited for Willis, who was spending more time with Sansa Stark. At first he had done so because she had asked him to. Then because he wished to see more of the direwolf. Lately, though, it was because he actually enjoyed spending time with the girl. She was far too young for a match at the moment. But simply having the two be friendly and comfortable around each other was a start, and for that Olenna was incredibly grateful once again for Margaery. Her granddaughter had already taken Sansa under her wing, and given what she had found out about the girl in her very first lessons, she needed to, as to call the girl naive would be to do her a disservice. Olenna thought she was simply uneducated in the finer points of politics, something she had been glad Margaery had pointed out to her. With her help and with Willis's willingness to offer his own insights, there was already a marked difference in the girl. Grandmother, I'm sorry I'm late, Willis said as he entered the room. It's no issue. Sit. We have much we must discuss. As he sat, she handed him the letter from Jon Arryn, watching his expression as he read it. Had she a looking glass nearby when she herself read it, she'd have no doubt had the same expression as he wore now. Willis looked worried, annoyed, and on the verge of laughing all at the same time, the sheer desperation in Jon Arryn's letter along with the vague threats all combining to, in the end, make him laugh. "Is this for real?" he asked, and she nodded. "It is. So we're to what? Keep giving them coin in the hope he can get us a betrothal. He can't promise, and should we not, we'll find ourselves out of favor." "That's the essence of it, yes," she replied. "Should they get us the betrothal?" Willis asked. "Then we would have to accept and support them. You'd let Margaery wed the prince." "Margaery will wed the king, Willis. The true one, not the false stag. But what I find most interesting is that he still can't promise it. That even with the withdrawal of the funds he can't promise the betrothal. It makes what Jaime Lannister told me now seem even that much more true." "Which was?" "That the king wishes a Stark for his son." "Sansa?" Willis asked. "Aye. Is that why you wish us together, grandmother?" Willis asked, shaking his head. "I wish you together because in the future she will be the best possible match for you. Given the North's rise and given who the king will be, it would strengthen us even more," she said, and Willis nodded, looking at her. "Would Lord Stark not consider the match with Joffrey?" "Another time he'd welcome it, no doubt, but from what the king says, his uncle is behind him fully. He'd hardly marry his daughter to Joffrey if that's the case. Even if he would, I doubt he'll get the chance. You think the king will move before they could wed?" "It'll be years before she's flowered, Willis. I doubt the king's dragons can be hidden forever. Once they've grown, once they're big enough, there is no other choice. We must move." "What if they look for the betrothal with the Starks anyway?" "Betrothals can be broken," she said, smiling, remembering her own. "Your uncle brought another even more interesting letter. This one from Tyrion Lannister," she said, and handed it to him. As he read it, she pondered her own moves against the crown. Stopping funding was one thing. Should she go further, raise prices perhaps, or cut supplies? Would the king wish her to do either? She wasn't sure. One thing she'd learned early on about Jon was he, like her granddaughter, didn't like to see people suffer, especially the small folk, and it would be them, rather than the crown, who would. No, for now, she'd leave it at this and begin to see to more training for her men. They needed to be prepared. Garland perhaps would be best. "Lomis is not involved," Willis said, and she looked at him, seeing the relief in his face. "No, but did you see the names who are—" "It's almost all the great houses ourselves. The Tullys and Starks seem to have gotten away with it." "Why?" "I don't know, but if I were to hazard a guess, I'd say it was a mistake on their part, or perhaps they weren't able to interfere with the appointments. We know Stark's former maester was involved. Perhaps our own and Tully's were too. But this doesn't change too much either. It means we don't have to worry about Laban's killing us all, at least," Willis said with a chuckle. "How goes it with the hawks?" "It's coming. I can get them to fly and come back from greater distances. I've been reading up on Essos, and apparently pigeons can be used too. Would they not be too easy to pick off?" she asked. "Perhaps I may ask Garland to take some to the Fossaways when next he travels. A couple of pigeons and one of the hawks, have him release them a day apart and see which, if any, arrive back and how quickly they do so," he said, and she smiled. Glad to see him on top of things. "Are things set for tonight?" "Yes, grandmother. Margaery will have a really good name day celebration," he said, exasperatedly. Once he left, she went to her bedroom and lay down, finding herself in need of a small rest. She wasn't tired, more her head hurt from examining all the possible outcomes of future events. What the crown would, or more importantly could do to them, weighed on her mind. Could they strip them of their wardenship? Perhaps. Would they? She doubted it. They, like the Lannisters, held the ace card, both in terms of their gold and the knowledge of who Jon really was. But should the crown move early, should they go against them? Would they, too, not have to move earlier? Was Jon ready? If it came to it, he would need to be. Should they be stripped, then to keep the reach he'd need to announce himself and move quickly. While Adelana wasn't a military mind, she wasn't completely oblivious to it. The Reach, the West, and the North, Dorne and the Loyalist houses, all of them together far exceeded what Robert and Jon Arryn could call on. But a boy king is harder to support than a grown one. When she woke a couple of hours later, she was surprised she'd fallen asleep at all. Usually, when her mind was full, she found she could not. Was it confidence that allowed her to do so, or simply tiredness? She found it made no difference. She was refreshed, and so she changed and made her way to ensure the final preparations for Margaery's feast were taken care of. Casterly Rock 2094 AC. Jaime. He dodged and moved to the side, Jon's blade coming close to catching him by surprise. Then he parried another strike and moved forward. Arthur stood watching, his eyes on both of them, but mainly on Jon as he moved quicker and quicker. They had resumed their morning spars once Jon's injured shoulder had healed, and for the first few, it had been a frustrating experience. His movements, his speed, his power, all of it were down, and at first, both he and Arthur had worried the injury was more serious than it had seemed. But as with all things Jon, he found out that if his mind wasn't right, then his swordplay wasn't, something which both he and Arthur had discussed. "I thought I was supposed to be the broody one," Jon said, moving close to him and spinning as he aimed at his shoulder. "You usually are. I was just giving it a go to see if it fits. Turns out it doesn't," he said, aiming 2 strikes in quick succession at him. Eventually, he caught the blade and disarmed him. It was taking longer and longer to do it, the morning sessions having the desired effects, both to improve his work and clear his head. Jon walked over and grabbed the water jug, filling out 2 mugs, one for each of them, and bringing them over. He waited until Arthur came and sat down beside them, the time for talking now upon them. "Are you two ever gonna spar?" Jon said with a chuckle, looking at them both. Maybe after we eat," Arthur said, and Jaime looked at his former brother to see a soft smile on his face. "Not in private," Jon said. "Why not?" he asked. "I think it would be good for everyone to see it. I'm sure Daisy would love to cheer you on, my lord. As for your Arthur, no doubt. Ashara and Cregan would wish to see you, and Jaime crossed blades. "I'm sure they would, but just us, Jon. No crowds," Arthur said, and Jon nodded. "I've been talking to Melisandre about the glass candles," Jon said, and Jaime shuddered. He didn't like how close they were becoming. "What did she say?" Arthur asked. "It seems they allow for many things. Some I've seen myself and one which I'm trying to get to grips with." "You've been using them?" Jaime asked. They're hard to control. I'm not strong enough to fully do so, but I've seen the past, Marguerite saw the future, and I can somewhat control seeing now." "Seeing now?" Arthur asked. Jon told them of the visions he had, of seeing things which could only be occurring in the present, of different places at the same time, and how it got away from him. If what he was saying was true and he had no doubt of it, then should he be able to control it, they'd have the best spy network ever imagined. They wouldn't need to do anything more than just look into the glass candles and see events as they occurred around the realm. He was thinking of the potential of this when he realized that both Jon and Arthur were still speaking. "That's impossible, isn't it?" Arthur said, his voice full of doubt. "Any more impossible than seeing the past or future? Any more impossible than seeing the present? Arthur, in my room right now, are 2 of the most impossible things the world has known." "I think it's entirely possible," Jon said. "What is?" he asked, clearly having missed it. "Jon says with the glass candles we could communicate with each other, that we could have one and he could have another, and we could actually speak to each other no matter the distance apart." Arthur said, and now he found himself agreeing with him. "That can't be done. Surely." "Melisandre says it can. I've tried, and it's there, I know it is. Rhaenys agrees, and even Lygaran says it's true." "You can speak to him?" he asked, knowing this had been bothering him for some time. "More and more ever since he told me of them, he blocks me sometimes, and our connection is nothing like the one with Rhaenys. I know for sure now he's for someone else, not me." "Your aunt or uncle?" Arthur said. "I don't think so. Certainly not Viserys. Not after what you told me of him." "Daenerys, then?" Jaime said. "I don't know. It doesn't seem so. I saw her with her own dragons, 3 of them. None looked like Lygaran. They were different ones." Yadiane didn't know if he should be worried or not. Arthur had told them both that Viserys was far too much like his father, that he had watched them both, protected them from afar, and once he saw Viserys, he couldn't go to him, not even for Rhaegar. He had felt guilty about Daenerys, but his path was not theirs. He knew that now. He was where he was supposed to be. But another Targaryen with dragons could lead to another dance. They would need to discuss this more, to decide if they should reach out, have the Hound bring her back, Castamere, Clegane's own keep. There were many places she could stay and be protected in. She needed to know of Jon, though. She needed to know the truth. "He's doing it again," Jon japed, and Arthur laughed. "Daenerys," he said, and Jon's brow furrowed, "is on her path," Jon said, and his voice left no room for further discussion. "For now, at least. Come, let's break our fast. The others should be up soon," Arthur said, and they walked off. While Jon and Arthur walked to the hall, he headed back to his rooms. Daisy should be waking now, and she was starting to get uncomfortable in the mornings once again. He made it just in time. She was searching for the pail he kept close, just in case. Grabbing it, he held her hair as she threw up and then poured her a mug of water. "I hate you," Daisy said. "I love you," he replied, and she shook her head, drinking her water. "You feel up to eating?" he asked, and she nodded. He waited until she got dressed, and then together they walked to break their fast, entering the hall to see it fuller than he expected. He took his seat beside his aunt and uncle, Jaime having decided to stay on for a bit. As Daisy ate the honeyed porridge, he looked at Jon, who was speaking to his cousin, and Loras, Brienne, Sorella, and Joy sitting beside him, looking on with interest. "Arthur and I are sparring in a bit," he said softly, as Daisy ate her second plate of porridge. "No, I really hate you," she said, frowning at him. "You'll soon be able to smack me over the head with your mace once again," he said, smiling, which she returned. "Don't think I've not imagined it." "I've no doubt you have," he chuckled, getting another frown from her. Once they'd finished eating, he looked to Arthur, who nodded, and so they walked to the sparring area. It was a far larger crowd than he hoped for. His uncle and aunt had come along, as had Ashara and Joy. While Jon had brought all his friends, he half expected to see Rhaegar and Rhaegar too. Thankfully, although in another way disappointedly, he'd not be facing Don, the sword far too noticeable. Instead, it would be long swords only. "Ser Daeron," he said, holding and then tapping his sword on the ground. "Sir Jaime," Arthur said, a small smile on his face. The swords crashed together and they began to move. Arthur as quick and nimble as ever, though for Jaime he seemed slower, though perhaps that was more that he was used to facing Jon. What Jon may have had on Arthur in terms of speed, he was far behind in everything else, as Jaime was finding he himself was too. Power-wise they were evenly matched, but technique-wise, Arthur was still the very best he'd ever seen. His strikes, his movements, how the blade came at you, all of it forced him back and back, his own parries and strikes seemingly ineffective. Barristan, Arthur, Jaime. He knew they were all far above anyone else in terms of swordsmanship. He and Barristan were of the same level, with maybe he having the edge, but Arthur was above them both, and he relished it. The end came after to what Jaime had felt, mere moments, but given the sweat he could feel, the heavy breathing that Arthur was doing, perhaps it had been longer than he had thought. Arthur moved in, and after parrying his own strike, the blade moved so powerfully that had Arthur not stopped the blow when he did, then Jaime would have lost his head. "I yield, Ser Daeron," Jaime said with a grin as he looked at the blade, which was inches below his neck. He heard the clapping and turned to look up, seeing Jon and the others all looking on with varying looks of awe on their faces. As he moved to walk to Daisy, whose own look was a cross between shocked and relieved, though Arthur stopped him to whisper in his ear, "You've improved, I got lucky," Arthur said, and Jaime shook his head. "I barely kept up." "As did I took this round, perhaps when next we spar you'll take the next." Jaime didn't know if Arthur was just letting him down gently or not. All he heard really was next time they sparred. Knowing that he and his brother would spar more was enough for now. He walked up to Daisy, who kissed him and then helped her back to their rooms. She usually rested after breaking her fast, and she was already yawning when he got there. He received the note sitting in his solar later that day. The ship would be ready for inspection on the morrow. The Dragon Cub, the newest pinnacle ship and the first to be fitted out with the rooms to transport the ice from the north, was about to sail on its maiden voyage. Without Craislin, Jon had taken charge of the building of the rooms. He'd drawn what he needed and given full and clear instructions, and then checked up occasionally to see it done. Now finally they were ready. The ice house they built on the grounds of Casterly Rock would be the first of its kind. A simple structure built into the ground and lined with the same materials as the rooms on the ships. They'd need to build ice wagons to transport the ice itself too. But should it work how Jon suggested, they'd be soon delivering it all over Westeros and Essos, bringing in even more coin. "My lord, there's a lad who arrived at the main gates who says he's been sent here by Lord Tyrion," Arlen said as he walked into the room. "A lad? A young lad about Jon's age. He arrived with some of our guards. I've had them escort him to the floor below, just to be safe. Have him brought up here. Check him for weapons, just in case." "Already done, my lord. He's clean." Carried a small knife with him, but handed it up before we even searched him. "Well done," he said with a nod, and Arlan left to go fetch the lad. A few moments later, the lad was brought into the room. He was, as Arlan said, about Jon's age. Though it seemed unlike Jon and Loras, this lad hadn't done any sparring or training whatsoever. In his hand, the boy held 2 letters which he handed to him before he read them, though he asked the boy who he was and how he knew his brother. "My name is Satin, my lord, Satin Flowers. I helped your brother while in Old Town, ran messages for him and showed him around. He asked if I'd like to be his page or squire." Satin said, his face red. "My brother didn't return with you, though?" he asks suspiciously. "No, my lord. Prince Oberyn and Lady Ellaria left on one of the other ships and told me and the guards to wait for the next one and to come here and deliver those to you." Satin pointed to the letters. Jaime opened the first one, eager to find out where his brother was. "Dearest brother, Oberyn and I have found out much and made contact with Marwyn. My other letter will explain that in far more detail. On speaking to the master, we found that Lomora is in Pentos and is someone we'd wish to speak to. Marwyn thinks he'd be a great asset for Jon too. So Oberyn and I have decided to travel to Pentos ourselves and find the man and bring him back. It's far easier to do so from here than to travel back to Lannisport first. Satin is a good lad, Jaime. Find a place for him until I return. I intend to take him into my service, so treat him well. He deserves it. Oberyn will ensure I am safe, and I shall return once I've found Lomara. It should not take long. Tyrion!" He looked at the boy before opening the second letter. "Jamin, Marwyn is on our side." He confirmed some names for us. "Luwin, as Jon said, is one of the ones we can trust, as are Veman in Riverrun, Miles in Sunspear, and Lomis in Highgarden. I've sent Olenna a letter confirming her own maester is to be trusted to an extent. It's the ones who are not. Which gives me pause. Cossel, 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 and Arden are all confirmed to be in on things, as are Theobald and Walgrave. The fact that 4 of these represent the great houses and that Crosselwyn would have made it 5 shows just how deep this runs. Were it not for timing and death, then both Winterfell and Highgarden would no doubt have their own maesters be part of things too. To that end, Marwyn has promised to do everything he can to send us a maester we can trust. Should a man named Jardine arrive to take up the post, then Marwyn has been successful. Should anyone else arrive, then treat them as if they are the same as Crelin. Marwyn will continue to dig into things, and until then, we can take all necessary precautions. Tyrion. Yazian placed the letters on the table and looked to the boy once again. "It seems my brother thinks highly of you. Satin, we'll find a place for you here, should you wish it." "I do, my lord. Thank you." Satin set a large smile on his face, and Jaime decided to show the lad around rather than have Arlun or one of the servants do so. "Come with me, then. I'll introduce you to everyone." "My lord? My own squires and ward are here, too. All are around your own age. I'm sure they'll make you feel welcome." Casterly Rock 294 AC. Melisandre. Seeing a dragon in the flesh was one thing, seeing one being born quite another, but that was just one of the many things she'd seen the prince do since she'd arrived here. When he'd shown her the glass candles, shown her them lighting, she'd almost dropped to her knees in reverence. She had seen the greatest sorcerers in Ashai try and fail to do so. Yet her prince could light them as if it was nothing, watching the flames appear on the top of the candles just by the prince's will alone, just by him wishing it so. If there were ever more proof than the dragons needed to show he was Rother's chosen, then this was it. When he had handed her the first candle, the things she'd seen, the blue eyes, the ice, the wall crumbling down, the army of dead men, all things she'd seen before, but fleetingly. But in the prince's presence, she saw them for far longer, saw them as they marched, saw them as the darkness fell, before once again she saw the light and the flames as the prince brought the dawn, that he would listen to her counsel, take her advice, made her feel worthy of serving him, her and her guards, willing to lay down their lives for his should he ask it of them. Why would I do such a thing, life? Melisandre is a gift from the gods, is it not? Surely then, only the gods have the right to ask such a thing. You are my god's chosen, my prince. His will upon this world, what you command, comes from Risher himself. Should you ask it of me, it shall be done. Then no, I shall never ask it, nor ever accept it. If I am his chosen, then this is my choice. Primero, Makoro, Kinvara, she had prayed with, worshipped with, and listened to them all. She knew the high priest and priestess didn't care for the lives of those that were beneath them. Priests had been sent on missions that could only lead to their deaths based upon the will of Rhaenor before. Or was it the will of his priests? The more she thought of it, the more time she spent with the prince, the more she questioned it. Thoros told me that offering a sacrifice to the fire is seen as Rose will. Is this true? It is my prince. Does that not seem strange to you? It increases the power, my prince. It brings us closer to Rosier. I know of blood magic, Melisandre, the power of blood, mine own. My family's. I've read your book. There is power in blood, in king's blood, in dragon's blood. Indeed, my prince, your own, I've no doubt, is the most powerful of all. Then should we need power? We can use it then. There is no need for other blood to be spilled. As you command, my prince. I will not have people burn, my lady. If I am his chosen, this is my choice. She watched the prince as he sparred. After his injury, he had taken time to recover. He had seemed ordinary to her, and for a time she had found this most disconcerting. He was the prince that was promised, destined to defeat the great other and bring the dawn. Yet he lost to 2 boys and a girl easily, but soon she learned that all was not as it seemed, be it his injury or other matters. Something wasn't quite right with the prince. Once it was right again, she saw it. He moved faster than he should. He almost seemed to be able to glide through the air, the sword in his hands an extension of them as it found its target again and again. Her 2 guards, both trained in the techniques that only the fiery hand knew, found him a fascinating subject to watch, said he moved as they did, though how they knew not. He is his chosen, she would say, and they would nod in agreement. When they asked could he spar with them, the prince had agreed, and then she saw it even more clearly. The moves he did, the spins, the turns, her guards moved the same way. But Jon was quicker than they, almost as if he was tapping into even more power than they were, even deeper into the source of their power. While the guards beat him, they did so simply because of their advantages in strength and experience, both men saying they'd lose soon enough. My prince, perhaps you should travel to Volantis, study some at the temple, learn the ways of the fiery hand, the ways of some of the magic of our order. One day I may do that, my lady, but not today. Here I have much I must do before I can even begin to think of travel, but one day. Perhaps when the dragons are large enough. Perhaps. Do you dream of Valyria, my prince? My dreams are of many things. I've seen Valyria, seen it in the past and the present. I have no wish to go there, but we don't always get what we wish for, my lady. Sometimes the choice is made for us. Sometimes we must follow the path we've been set on. My sister wishes to see the land of our forefathers, and in this, I have no choice. We are one, my lady. Where she goes, I go. Then ask it, and I shall follow my prince. No, my lady, your place is here. This is my choice, he said, and she smiled. Crownlands 29-4 AC. Cat. Helping Edmure settle in as lord was more stressful than she had thought it should be. Her brother seemingly wanting to settle old grudges and slights, even before he'd been officially named as Lord Paramount. It had taken every ounce of her persuasion skills to keep him in check, and she feared he would do something stupid once she left to return north. Not that she'd be doing so for quite some time yet. Handling her father's arrangements had been hard. Organizing things so he got the right send-off was even more difficult than she'd imagined. But she had pulled it off, and he was sent to the gods in a manner befitting him. She'd been so concerned with appearances that she'd not yet properly had time to grieve. Now, given what she was planning, she found the time had long passed. So focused was she on the future. We're passing Rosie. My lord, we should be arriving at King's Landing by the early evening. She heard one of the guards say to Edmure. Good. She was looking forward to seeing Payer again, to seeing Lysa and Jon Arryn, though she was annoyed at her sister too. She had hoped she'd come to see their father off. Knowing she was in King's Landing and had not come had bothered her. Only the fact of her babe allowing for her to forgive her sister the slight. She was glad her uncle had agreed to act as castellan. He was sorely needed, though why he seemed so fond of the bastard was beyond her. We should act as if we don't care, Edmure, at least around Brynden. Let him believe all is forgotten about. He'll never accept it. Perhaps I can argue it a little. That sounds good. In the end, though, we tell him we've no plans for the bastard. What if he finds out Kate? By then it'll be too late. Besides, he is our family. He'll remember that in the end. Despite what she had said, she was starting to believe her uncle wouldn't accept it. That when Jon Snow was dead, he'd know it was them, while he'd never speak up about it. She knew he'd do as he said she would. But the loss of an uncle was a small price to pay for her family's security, for their welfare and future. It was one she'd pay gladly. She drifted off briefly before they reached the gates, though it was the smell that woke her. I meant to warn you of that. Sorry, Edmure said as they entered and rode to the Red Keep. Does it always smell this bad? she asked, and her brother nodded. Arriving at the Red Keep, she was pleased to see Jon Arryn, Lysa, and Petter lined up to meet them. Seeing Lysa carrying her babe in her arms, she found herself more able to forgive her for not coming to the funeral. The babe looked so small, so sickly, she worried for him immediately, though Lysa seemed far happier than when she'd seen her last. Jon Arryn looked as if he'd aged far more than the 10 years since she'd seen him last. As for Petter, he looked handsome and prosperous, and she felt happy for her friend. Once the introductions were made, they were escorted into the keep itself. They'd be staying in the maiden vault, which she was more than happy about. "Cat, you look beautiful, as always," Petter said, his smile beaming as he looked at her. "Thank you, Petter. It's good to see you again." "You too. Perhaps we can speak later, once you've settled," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "His Grace wishes for you both to join him and the Queen for dinner, Catelyn, if you feel up to it after your travels. That is," Jon Arryn said, and she smiled and nodded. "Of course, my lord. I'd be honored." After leaving her things in her room, bathing and changing with the help of the group of servants that they had supplied her with, she walked to the private dinner quarters to eat with the king and queen. Edmure walked nervously beside her. Once inside, she was happy to see Lysa and Jon Arryn would be joining them, and they sat awaiting the king and queen to arrive. "Cat, you look even more beautiful than I remember," Robert said as he and the queen arrived. Cat and the others immediately rising to their feet. "Your Grace," she replied, a soft smile on her face. "Lady Catelyn," Cersei said as she looked at her. "My queen," she said with a curtsy. A few moments later, she was sitting down, and after the king had grown bored with speaking to Edmure of hunting, he turned to her. "A pity Ned's not with you, Cat. I'd have enjoyed seeing my oldest friend again." Robert said, his voice both accusing and slightly sad. "Had he known I planned to come visit then, I've no doubt he would have come too. Your Grace, but unfortunately my father's passing was a surprise. Neither of us expected. Of course, I'm sorry for your loss, both of you. A great man, your father. He will be missed." "He will, your Grace," she said, her voice low. "We'll do the ceremony tomorrow, your Grace, naming Lord Edmure as Lord Paramount, and the swearing of fealty," Jon Arryn said, and the king nodded. "Now, Cat, tell me of your family. How are they doing? Your boy, the one you named for me, how is he?" Cat told him then of Robb and Arya, of Bran and Sansa, and when she spoke of her daughter, the king perked up, eager for more information on Sansa, going so far at one point as to asking if it was true she took after her in looks and personality, something she was proud to confirm. "I have a son the same age, Cat, Joffrey. You'll no doubt meet him while you're here," Robert said before Jon Arryn and then Cersei interrupted. "Your Grace, perhaps now is not the time," Jon Arryn said, confusing her. "Yes, Robert, perhaps we should speak to Lady Catelyn on this another time." "Another time? She's right here now, and who better than to carry the news back to Ned than his own wife," Robert said. "Your Grace?" she asked. "Many years ago, I wished Ned and I to be tied in bonds of marriage. He was the brother I chose, Cat. He still is. The damn dragon spawn stole that chance away from me. Stole her from me." "Robert," Cersei said, her voice rising, but the king ignored her and continued speaking. "But I have a son, you have a daughter. Fate is giving me a second chance. So what say you, Cat?" "Your Grace?" she asked, pretending to be confused. She could see Edmure looking at her with a smile which was almost as big as the one she was hiding behind her apparent confusion. "I wish a betrothal, Cat, between Joffrey and Sansa. I would have your daughter as my good daughter, as the next queen of the Seven Kingdoms." Every inch of her, every fiber in her, wished to shout yes at the top of her lungs, but she knew she'd need to speak to Ned, or at least pretend to, so she schooled her features and answered, "Your Grace, if it were up to me, I'd accept in a heartbeat, but I must discuss it with Ned, though I've no doubt of his answer, as I'm sure you do not. So I shall say yes, but ask it not to be announced until I speak to my husband." "Of course, Cat, I'd expect nothing less. You've no idea how happy this makes me," Robert said, his smile larger than her own. "Me too, your Grace." She looked as he filled his wine glass and handed her one too while waiting, while everyone else filled their own and raised them. "To Joffrey and Sansa," Robert said loudly and exuberantly. "Joffrey and Sansa," she said just as loud, as did Edmure, and, in her excitement, she didn't notice how both Cersei and Jon Arryn were less loud in their own cheers. As she undressed later that night, she heard a knock on the door and answered to see Petter standing there. She quickly covered herself and looked at him angrily. "Petter, I was readying myself for bed." "I'm sorry, Cat. Forgive the intrusion." "Can't it wait until tomorrow?" No, I came as soon as I heard the news. Oh, she said, turning and pouring them both some wine. You don't sound happy, Cat. I am, just tired. Do you think your husband will accept it? The betrothal, of course it's his best friend's son, Sansa, would be queen. There is no match better, she said. The heir of Highgarden, he said, and she frowned. A cripple over a prince? I think not, Kadir. My daughter is worth far more than that. Indeed, she is, Cat, but her fostering there. Perhaps that's why your husband sent her there. It wasn't Ned, she mumbled. What? He asked, not hearing her. It wasn't Ned, it was the bastard Petyr, Jon Snow. He's trying to take Winterfell from Robb. He sent her there. It was his idea. Cadden, I didn't know. You have to help me, Petyr. You must. I need you to help me, she said, her voice full of pleading. Ask me anything, Cat. If it's in my power, I'll do it. You only need ask. She could have kissed him right then and there, finally someone who understood what a danger the bastard was. Someone who knew how she felt. Someone who cared for her. I want him dead, Petyr. I want to send someone to kill him. Will you help? Of course I will. Petyr set a smile on her face, and she felt the relief immediately. Sunspear 2094 AC. Arianne. The feast was in full swing, celebrating with a Lannister not something men and women of Dorne had ever imagined being a possibility, and certainly not something she had ever thought to be one. However, Tyrion she found to be far different than she would have imagined. The dwarf was witty charming when he wished to be, and most importantly, he was fun. She found far too many men to be boring, far too many to wish to speak on one subject only, be it arms and martial pursuits like Daemon, or power like Dray. Tyrion, though, didn't limit himself. His interests ran into almost everything, be it wine or trade politics or knowledge. No subject seemed beyond him. She found herself immensely enjoying their talks, so much so that Quentyn, despite their earlier talk, still glared at her as she laughed when Tyrion said something funny. He is a Lannister and a dwarf. Why should we feast him? He is a guest of our uncle. His family is the reason the mountain that rides no longer does so. The reason why Amory Lorch breathes no more. They have helped avenge Diaxliae, helped avenge Aegon and Rhaenys. They were the ones behind it in the first place, Quentyn said, his voice raised. You blame a child for that. Are you responsible for everything Father does, am I? That is not the same. Father does not order the deaths of children. You will treat our guest with respect, Quentyn, or I shall send you back to Yronwood in disgrace. Or better yet, Oberyn will teach you what being a Martell really means. It seemed, though, that their conversation hadn't taken Quentyn still the same petulant and childish boy he had always been. She would shame him if he spoke up, though, and he knew it, so he held his tongue, which was more than she could say for Tyrion, who was presently telling a delightfully rude story about a jackass and a honeycomb. Such a wicked tongue he has, she thought with a smile, wondering if he knew how to use it in other ways. Lord Tyrion, perhaps you'd join me for some air, she said, smirking, as Oberyn nibbled on Illyria's ear. I would be honored, Princess, he said, and rose to his feet. They walked from the hall to the balcony, other couples sitting around drinking and enjoying the cool breeze. Dornish feasts were far less formal than those in the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. Once the food was served, the high table became less of the focus. Instead, people would dance, move around more. Only politics and important matters kept people to the high table. Looking back into the room, she saw Dray and some others look to her forlornly. She had kept her attention almost exclusively on Tyrion this night, kept her conversation mainly to him and her uncle. Rather than work the room, she had instead worked the man, trying to find out if it was a brief, momentary lust she felt for the forbidden thoughts of being with a dwarf, or was there more to the man than his size. This is not what I expected, Princess, Tyrion said as he sipped on the wine. Arianne, she said as she sat on the small wall, her dress opening to show off her legs. Arianne, a Dornish feast. It's far different than I had expected. In Dorne, we like to savor things. Tyrion, enjoy each dish as if it's our last. Enjoy the spices, the flavor, every mouthful. Are you not a man who would enjoy every mouthful? She said as she crossed her legs, her dress revealing even more of them. I am Arianne, though we are more used to rushing through our meals, to rushing so we can enjoy the sweet taste of our desserts. I find myself more willing to go far more slowly. Slow can be good, Tyrion, though there is a time for speed too. Do you not agree? She said, licking her lips. Variation, Arianne. I find variation to be key, he said, smiling at her, his mismatched eyes gleaming in the night sky. Arianne reveled in flirting. She reveled in making a man lose himself, a man lusting for her, and she could see that Tyrion certainly did want her, but either he was far better at playing this game or something was holding him back. Whichever it was, it intrigued her, excited her, relieved her boredom. She was about to say something even more direct when Oberyn and Illyria walked out. Obra, Ning, and Tywin too. "Ah, there my niece is, showing Tyrion the sights, Ariak." Oberyn set a half-smirk on his face. "Just showing him what delights Dorne has to offer, uncle," she said, and smirked when Tyrion gulped. Good. It was nice to know he really was interested, and not just flirting for the sake of it. She stood up and walked to her uncle, kissing his cheek. "It's good to have you back, uncle, though I'm distraught you'll not be staying for long. We leave on the morrow. Ori, we must speak to Dorne and then be on our way," Oberyn said, and she looked to see a bit of disappointment on Tyrion's face, which matched her own. "Then we must make the very best use of the night we have, don't you agree, Tyrion?" she said, and saw the dwarf smile. They spent some more time on the balcony, before the cool air chilled too much. Then after some dancing which Tyrion didn't partake in, nor did she since he was who she was to dance with, the night eased down. Tyrion, despite looking like he was drinking as much as everyone else, was practically sober, and she smirked as she noticed his trick, always holding a half-full glass, always looking as if you just emptied your own. After bidding everyone good night, and going back to her room, she quickly changed into something far more revealing. Giving the guards quite an eyeful, which wasn't anything new, she made her way to Tyrion's room and knocked at the door. The look he gave her when he opened it fed into her arousal. She said nothing, just walked in and closed the door behind her. "Princess I," he stuttered adorably. "Welcome to Dorne," she said, with a smile as she undid the straps and her dress fell to the floor. As she stood at the gates waving them off many hours later, she smiled. The marks he'd left on her were covered for now, though she'd take pleasure in seeing them later. She had asked him to bite her, and he had, asked him to please her, and he did, asked him to satisfy her, and she was more than sated. Smiling, she turned and walked back towards the old palace. She had asked him to return and he had promised he would, and she found herself far more eager for his than for anyone else's, thus far. Riverlands, King's Landing, 2094 AC. Sir Richard. He and Darius had both stayed in the shack and taken a turn to go to the small village. He felt in some ways lost here, cut off from the rest of his lips, and so he had no wish to stay too long. The news Darius brought him of Hoster's death, though, changed everything. Richard could honestly say there were few men he hated as much as Hoster Tully. Few he wished to see suffer more than him. But with him gone, that meant that Edmure was now Lord Paramount of the Trident, now Lord of Riverrun, and so he began to consider what this would mean for his king. On one hand, he would be a terrible lord. The fractures in the Riverlands could be exploited, even more. They could both take advantage, and also weaken any potential force that Robert could call against them. On the other, being a lord was vastly different than being heir. A lord had more access to funds, more access to men to order around, given he believed Edmure had tried to kill his king once. Would this now mean he'd try with greater effort? He needed to speak to the girl Darius had inside, needed to know more about things. So he had Darius arrange a meeting and waited until the morning when she'd show up. "Where is she, Darius?" he asked impatiently the next morning. "She'll be here. She needs time to get away. That, and we usually meet closer to the keep." "Go find her. Escort her here and back if you need to," he said, and Darius nodded. They arrived an hour or so later, and the young girl seemed incredibly nervous. The fact she was meeting him seeming to have scared her somewhat. "Pearl, this is Alien. He's a friend of mine. You can tell him anything. I'll be outside." Darius said, nodding to him as he walked outside. "My lord," she said, and he shook his head. "Not a lord, Pearl, just Allen. Take a seat. Have you eaten?" he asked, and she shook her head. He gave her the remainder of what he had been breaking his fast on. The deer meat, though cold, was still tasty, and the bread was fresh, and while at first she ate only a little, soon she was finishing the meal. "Darius tells me you've had some visitors, Pearl." "Because, my lord, the lord's sister and uncle have come and helped with Lord Hoster's funeral." "And what are they like, these visitors?" "The uncle is nice, my lord. He treats us all well. The lady is mean, though. She calls us out on things. Make sure we're dressed right and look right. Make sure we're not standing around, she calls it." "How are things between them all? Do they get along?" "The lady and the lord do. The uncle not so much. He don't spend much time with them. But those two always whispering, they are always speaking together." Richard looked carefully at the girl. She wasn't lying, he could tell, but could she be mistaken? Perhaps she'd just not seen them all together. He was about to ask her, but she spoke. Then about the funeral. The uncle, me lord, he weren't happy when the lord missed the shots, weren't happy at all. I were serving him later, and he was grumbling with some of the other lords, none of them happy, it seemed to me. About the lord's death? He asked. That, and about the new lord, me lord. What did you hear about the new lord? Not much. Something about a bastard and King's Landing, and bandits, but I didn't catch it all, only that one of them said something funny about the Frys. The girl said with a giggle, what did they say? That they were no more bandits than he were afraid, me lord. And the lord's death? Awfully quick, it were, me lord. 1 minute he were up and about, the next lying on the floor in his son's room. He was found in his son's room, he asked, and the girl nodded. Anything else? The uncle weren't happy, my lord, nor the lady, but the lord were. He's been smiling every time I brings him his drinks, my lord. I thank you. This is exactly what I need. Now Darius promised you a gold dragon, didn't he? He said, and the girl looked at him as if he was mad. He did, me lord, but I didn't find out anything, she said sadly. You found out enough. It's all there, he said, handing her a pouch full of coins. Giving her a gold dragon itself would cause far too many problems. Spend it wisely, and should you need to leave, speak to Darius. I'll find something for you. Thank you, my lord. Thank you. The girl said, looking at the pouch in awe. As she got up to leave, she turned back. Me lord? There is something else. I think the lord and lady are planning a trip or something. One of the guards and me, we meet for a tumble or two, and, well, he said, they're going to King's Landing, she said, and he nodded, waiting for her to leave. He sat there while Darius led the girl back closer to the keep, trying to make sense of things in his head. Hoster's death was sudden, and it happened in his son's room. The Blackfish seemingly not in tune with his niece and nephew, and now a trip to the capital. What the hell were the fishes up to? When Darius came back, he spoke to him on the girl, telling him to keep her as a contact, to dissuade her from leaving for now. 2 days later, the girl's information was sound. Edmure and Catelyn, along with a decent-sized escort, were heading to King's Landing. After saying his goodbyes to Darius, he began to ride on ahead. He needed to be there before them. He rode hard to Derry, knowing that there he'd receive more information and a change of horses too. It took him almost 10 days to reach the keep, and when he did, he was annoyed to find Rhaegar not in the castle. He did get to change his horses, though, and did find some messages waiting for him, though nothing really interesting or important. He stayed the night and left after breaking his fast the next morning. He was tired, saddle sore, and wet as it had rained for the previous 3 days. By the time he arrived in King's Landing, he couldn't wait to be off his horse. Making his way to his building, he was glad to be home, though. Despite everything that had happened in this city, despite all he'd lost, King's Landing was his home. Allen, he heard Tobias say, as he dismounted. Not now, Tobias. I need a warm bath, a hot meal, and some rest. Whatever it is, it can wait until the morrow. I was just about to welcome you home, but it can wait. Tobias said with a chuckle. In the end, he enjoyed the bath, ate the meal, drank some ale, but sleep eluded him. So sitting at his desk, he went over the reports from his lips, read the whispers and the messages. Things progressing in the north, the Lord making changes to the town of Winter, a squid on his heels, though, nowhere to be found. The wolf boy traveling abroad, sailing with the mermen. He read the next ones from the Reach. A red wolf has landed, taking to her lessons well, settling in nicely and making herself a den. The thorns are prickly, a falcon trying to make a nest in their bushes. From Doran. Gifts received, welcomed, and treated with the respect they deserved. A small lion and a snake in the grass soon to arrive. From the Vale, proud lords up in arms as lions begin to roar, prices raised and shouts heard. The falcon's air grows ever weaker. From the Stormlands, a small stag travels far from home, looking for something in the rose garden. A lord has become far too friendly with a man of red, the faith not happy. From the east he opened the letter, wondering how Clegane was getting on. The boy fell. Nothing I could do. It was the girl you cared about anyway. There are people looking for her, people from here. I'm on the move, seems safest, for now. The girl's good, clever, and smart, brave too. We'll be fine, consider this my resignation. What your plans are, I care not. I'll not let her be used, not by them, not by you. Richard couldn't help but smirk. The king was right. Sandor was the right man. Though it bothered him he'd not receive more news. He could find them if he needed. Knowing she was safe was far more important than knowing where she was. He opened the letter from the west, eager to hear from his king. Richard, much has happened, much you may not be aware of. Much you no doubt will already know by the time you read this. Tyrion and Oberyn have traveled to Old Town. They will need to meet with Marwyn to find out more, but it seems the masters were far more involved. Cravelin spoke some, and we found out more, but we're searching in the dark. Richard, trust none but the names we give you. Not that you would anyway. Be safe, be well. Jaxley. He looked through his other messages, eager to see if there was more. There was confirmation from his lips that Tyrion and Oberyn arrived in Old Town and met the Maester, that they'd since left. But his Dornish lips had confirmed that. Once done, he began to write, sending out his orders. Then once he was ready, he'd prepare for the fishes. Soon he'd meet Barristan and see if there was anything else he needed to know. Get a different perspective should he need it. Highgarden 2094 AC. Marguerite. She looked at the box, almost eager to open it, eager to find out what it was. Jon had given her, but she wished to wait. She'd open it at the feast, and so she placed it in her pocket and made her way to the Great Hall. Her family, her friends, Sansa, even Fang were all there waiting for her when she entered. She heard them cheer and blushed a little as she walked to her seat. Her father smiled at her, then stood up and began to speak. My lords and ladies, I welcome you all to this name day feast. For my beloved daughter, raise your glasses, please, to Marguerite. Happy name day. Happy name day, she heard the voices say as the cheers rang out. Taking her seat, she turned to Sansa, who was sitting beside her. Well as sitting beside her friend, she smiled and the food began to arrive. The fare was a mixture of both normal feast dishes and some of her favorites, but this time it was she who decided who to send them down to. Seeing Lord Rensley at his table, she sent him the first dish, the Lord flashing her a welcoming smile. When they second came, she sent it to her cousins, then to Lord Tarley. Following on, then, in the order she and her grandmother had decided upon. She ate from the ones she enjoyed, took a taste of the ones she did not, as was custom, and looked forward to the sweets and desserts. Once they arrived and she'd eaten it was time for the presents. She smiled as her father turned to her first, he and her mother standing up to present her with their own. For my beautiful daughter, her father said, and she opened the box to see the beautiful necklace, the jewels immaculate. Garland and Leonette gave her some fabrics, others gave her more of them, some pretty dresses from her grandfather, though she had no doubt it was her aunts who picked them. Her grandmother gave her a beautiful book, its illustrations incredible. That it was the history of the Targaryens was no great surprise. Lady Marguerite, she heard Sansa say as she stepped forward. The shawl she carried in her hands, beautiful and delicate. I hope you like it, she said as she handed it to her. It was snow white, with golden roses embroidered on it, but as you looked closer among the white were little dots of red. It took her a moment to see it clearly, but somehow Sansa had managed to hide ghost outline among the patterns. The white wolf protecting and guarding the golden roses, Marguerite almost cried in her happiness, kissing Sansa on the cheek instead. My lady, I've been told you like to hawk, and though I know your brother breeds perhaps the best, perhaps you will accept these as a token of my affection. Lord Rensley said, and his words confused her, though she did think the little hawk chicks to be incredibly beautiful. I thank you, my lord. Your gift is most gracious, and I accept it gladly, she said, smiling as he bowed before walking away. As more and more gifts came, another book, this one from Samuel Tarley, much to his father's annoyance and her grandmother's amusement. She sat there, her hand on the box, wondering if she should open it now. In the end, her curiosity needed to be satisfied. She needed to know. So she took it out and carefully unwrapped it. Who's that from, sweetling? She heard her mother say. Jon, she said, smiling as she opened it. Sutter Jon sent you a gift, her father said, thinking it was someone else. A fossilway, perhaps. No, just Jon, she said, her smile beaming now as she finally had it unwrapped. She was confused at first when she looked inside. It seemed to be parchment, small pieces of parchment, though as she touched them, she found something solid at the bottom. Reaching in, she took one of them out and looked at it and felt her heart almost stop. It was her grandmother, drawn so small it fitted easily into the box. But the colors, the way it looked, it was her. It was as if she was holding her in her hand. Looking through the others, she felt overwhelmed. Garland, Wellis, Loras, her mother and father, Joy, Ghost, Winter, Rhaenyra's, two, which she quickly put in her pocket. The last one, though, took her breath away, and tears of happiness fell from her eyes. He had placed it in a small covering, something she'd not seen before, something one would put on a table or desk, As she looked at the picture of Jon and she together seemingly dancing, her fingers touching the glass that covered them, she wiped her eyes and looked to her grandmother and father, who were looking at her with concern. Jon made me some drawings, she said, and handed out the ones of her family, while walking to show her grandmother the one he'd done of her. She placed the one of Jon and she in her pocket, alongside Rhaenyk's, while her family each looked at the images he'd drawn of them. "These are incredible. Look, Garland. It's you," Leonette said. "Rosieres, my sweet Loras," her mother said, while her father stared at his own image as if it was magical. "He's a very talented young man indeed," her grandmother said, and smiled as she looked at her own. After showing them to some more people, she gathered them up, Sansa showing the drawing of Ghost to Fang, who whined and moved to lick it. Sansa quickly moving it from her and telling her no. Margaery placed the drawings back in the box, placing the one of Rhaenyk's and the one of Jon and her in there too, before putting the box back in her pocket. Once done, she sat back down and hoped not too many boys would ask her to dance tonight. It was inevitably a forlorn hope. Not only as it was her name day would it mean she'd be almost required to dance, but for some reason her mother or father had seemed to have invited almost every boy they could to this feast. Even Lord Renly asked her to dance, and she found it most strange to dance with a man that much older than her. He was a good dancer, though, even if she was barely thinking of him as they did so. "You seem distracted, my lady," Rhaenys said. "Am I? My apologies, my lord. One too many dances, it would seem," she said, and thankfully he took it to mean what it meant, rather than as being about him. "Would you prefer to sit and speak, my lady? If you would, then I would be honored to." "I would, my lord. I thank you." She found him to be charming and witty, though both his interest in her and, it seems, in a boy sitting behind her at times she found disconcerting. By the time she said her goodbyes to him and reached the high table, she found her father smiling at her and nodding to the lord, and Sansa looking on furiously, sitting down with her friend. She felt it was best to deal with this first, before speaking to her grandmother on the other. "Sansa," she said softly, to no reply. "Sansa," she said again to nothing. Before a little more loudly, "Sansas," she said, and received a chuckle from the girl. "I thought Joy was still back at the Rock," Sansa said, smirking, before they both giggled. "Well, she always seems able to get people's attention. I thought I'd try it." "Sorry, Marge, I was just annoyed." "At who?" she asked, curious herself now. "Boys," Sansa said, looking down to a table below them. Margaery looked to see who was sitting there, Dickon Tarley, Horzan Hobber. A couple of Stormlands boys she didn't recognize, and some other boys from the Reach. She had danced with almost half of them, while she knew Sansa had danced with even more. Curious, she turned to see what it was they had done or said to annoy her friend. "What did they do?" "What, oh, nothing. It's just they think us stupid, simple little girls who swoon and faint at their feet." Sansa said, and Margaery smiled. She had said the same words to Sansa, no more than a week ago. "Well, not all boys are like them," Margaery said, thinking of one in particular. Which boy could you be speaking of?" "I wonder," Sansa said, and Margaery blushed. "My brothers," she said quickly, and saw a slight glance from Sansa to Willis. "Not mine," Sansa said, raising her eyebrow. "Sansa," she said in mock outrage. "Margaery," Sansa said, as both of them laughed. "I only know one of your brothers." "Then it's just as well he's not like other boys, then, isn't it?" Sansa said smugly. "Aye, it is," she replied softly. As the feast eventually died down, she bid her farewells, and she and Sansa and Fang walked to their rooms. She said goodbye to her friend and went into her own room, undressing and taking the box from her pocket. Opening her drawer, she took out her box with her letters from Jon, placing the drawings inside. She took the covered one of them both and climbed into her bed. Smiling at it as she placed it on her bedside table, she turned it so it faced where she slept. She blew out the candles and smiled as she slept, dreaming of dancing with a dark-haired boy, his face smiling as his gray eyes looked into her brown ones. The Water Gardens, 2094 AC. Doran, if receiving Varys had been a surprise, then receiving the body of Amory Lorch had been a shock. Knowing that Oberyn had gone to make the Mountain pay, his first instinct had been his brother had dealt with Lorch too. But the timing was off. He may have been able to. But would Oberyn risk dealing with Lorch when it was the Mountain he sought? His brother was reckless, that was true. He was though also determined. Lorch would be on his mind, but secondary. It would need to be far too convenient for him to kill the man. Reading the letter that had come with the body also confirmed it was just like Varys, not a Martell who had taken this vengeance, but just like with Varys, someone who sought their favor. Ferarnes. 2 words. That was it. 2 words which said so much. As he looked at the body, he had smiled at the stab wounds, happy the man had suffered. 100 he had counted with his own hand. What was the significance he didn't know, but he did fear it. Spitting on the corpse of the man, he feared it greatly. It was almost a moon later when his nieces and Surdamane arrived back, bringing with them the enormity that rides body, the streets of Sunspear, the water gardens. From the salty shore to the mountains Dorne celebrated. Dorne welcomed the news of the mountain's fall. At the feast where he had Cleganine's head placed with lorches, where he had their manhoods placed in their mouths, his gout had seemed to recede, if only briefly, allowing him to stand and address those there. My lords and ladies of Dorne, look and see the faces of the mountain, Amory, Lorch, and Varys, the men responsible for the rape and murder of my sister, the men responsible for the murder of my niece, the murder of my nephew. Look and see what Dorne thinks of these men, what vengeance we have wrought upon them. The mountain, killed by mine own brother's hands. Killed by your prince, by Oberyn, he shouted. Oberyn. To those who dare, I say this, we are Dornish. We never forget. We never forgive. Wrong us, and we will seek vengeance. We will seek justice. Dorne said. Vengeance! Justice! For Arya, for Rhaenys, for Aegon. Axia. Rosier Drences. Aegon! But that was then, and this was now, and as Yara stood behind him, he sat and waited. Oberyn would be here soon, and he would be bringing the Impieth with Casterly Rock with him. His brother had been gone for far too long. He had traveled to Old Town to find out something about maesters. Why, Dilryn knew not. His nieces refused to tell him, saying only their father would speak on Lannisport, Casterly Rock, and the things they'd seen upon his return. Sir Daemon, I wish you to tell me what you saw while in the West. I cannot, my prince. I am the ruler of Dorne, Sir Daemon. You have sworn to my house, have you not? I have, my prince. I would die for House Martell. But Prince Oberyn made me swear a blood oath, my prince. He wishes to speak to you himself, and I'll not break my vow to him. Another time he'd have admired the loyalty. At that time, however, he was annoyed and frustrated. Cernine was lucky he wasn't angry, though, and so he was just removed from his presence. My prince, they have arrived. He waited, and then they came in. His brother and his paramour, his brother's daughters, except for Tyaye and Sorella. And the imp. Brother, it is good to see you well. Oberyn said, smiling at him. You too, brother. It is good to see you safe, he said. And then Eolia stepped forward. My prince, she said, kissing his hand. Laria, your children are in the summer pool. I've no doubt, despite how wonderful my company may be, it is theirs you would much rather enjoy, he said, smiling as the woman smiled back at him, before quickly heading off. He hadn't dismissed her, and Oberyn and he had no issue with her being aware of certain of their plans. But he was a father, and he knew what it felt to be parted from his children. He could only imagine how worse that was for a mother. My prince, the imp said, stepping forward. Lord Tyrion, a pleasure to welcome you to my home, he said, only half lying. After sending for refreshments, they took their seats, and he looked to Oberyn, waiting to see him either dismiss the Lannister or begin to speak. It seemed to be the latter, as Oberyn looked to Tyrion and nodded. I learned many things while in the West, brother, many surprising things, but before I get to them, I need you to read this. Oberyn said, handing him the letter. Doran took it and looked at it. Seeing the writing, he felt his chest tightening. This is Yaxley's handwriting. It is brother read it. The tears came halfway through. By the end, they were flowing freely. His sister, his sweet sister. This couldn't be. A hidden dragon, a hidden king. Where was he hiding? As he looked up, it began to make sense. Jaime Lannister's squiring of the boy, the things he was able to do, the story that Stark had given, had always irked him, but like so many others, he believed in the honor of the man. Jon Snow, he said, and Oberyn smiled. Our nephew, brother. Our nephew lives. Nephew? What did he mean, nephew? This boy wasn't his blood. No matter what Aelia's letter said, he looked to Oberyn, who was still smiling. To Tyrion, who was watching carefully. You've met the boy? He asked his brother. I have. It's thanks to him the mountain and Lorch are dead. Thanks to him I am not. But there is more brother. He has Dragon's brother. One of them. One of them is our niece. What? he asked, and he wasn't sure if it was because of Oberyn saying the boy had dragons or because he said one was their niece. Oberyn explained, and the more he did so, the more fantastical the story got. Dragons, one with the spirit of Rhaenys somehow inside, his niece alive as a dragon. It seemed mad to him, but Oberyn and then the dwarf both confirmed it. The boy would be claiming the throne. The west, north, and reach already behind him. With dragons it would be inevitable. He would win. Doran needed to think. He needed to process. But before he got the chance, he was hit with more revelations. When Oberyn asked to see Callot, he had the maester brought to him, watching as his brother stood to his feet, laughing and japing with Tyrion as he moved closer to the maester. When he caught the man a blow to the back of his head, both he and Aryo moved, his guard's spear pointing at his brother while he had spun in his chair. "What is the meaning of this, Oberyn? What are you doing?" "This man is a traitor brother, a traitor to our house, a traitor to Doran, and a traitor to you." He began explaining the master's conspiracy to him, how they sought to bring down the dragons, sought to weaken House Targaryen, and by design, anyone close to them. When he told him of Eel's illnesses, of what the masters did to Rhaella, of what Callot may have done to him, Doran felt his anger rise. "Take him to the dungeons," he said to his guards. Once he had gone, he allowed Tyrion and Oberyn to go to the maester's rooms, allowed them to check for whatever it was they deemed of such import. They were gone for some time, but it allowed him to think. A hidden king presented both opportunities and problems. That Oberyn saw the boy as a nephew was concerning. But if the boy felt the same way, it kept him close, which was good. Knowing Olenna and his own ambitions, no doubt she sought a marriage for her support. The fact she'd already given it most likely meant that she'd already received those assurances. But Doran wished for Mortel blood on the throne, and despite Oberyn's feelings, this boy was not of their blood. No, Arianne would be queen, not a Tyrell. And if this boy wasn't willing to give him the betrothal, then he'd just need to stick to the one he'd already agreed to. When Oberyn and Tyrion returned a few minutes later, they were carrying some books. One in particular interested the dwarf, it seemed. He waited until his brother had sat down, waited until the dwarf was fully engaged. Knowledge was power, he knew better than most. It was time he gained some more of his own. "Tell me of my nephew, brother," he said, a smile on his face. King's Landing, 2094 AC. Barristan. With Richard back in town, Barristan felt even more excited heading to the tavern than usual. Now he'd receive even more up-to-date information than he usually got. Without the Master of Whisper, as it seemed, he was told basic everyday things. That the king was well, or that things were progressing. Never was he told that which he most wished to know of. Richard, being both his friend as well as one of the king's loyalist men, though would always tell him more. So as he entered the tavern and saw him sitting there, he felt like a far younger man eager to hear of his friend's news. Given his own news that he needed to tell the man it was a most fortuitous meeting, he took his seat. They ate and observed the pleasantries, although again with Richard they were always much more truly meant. "Come, my friend, we have much to discuss," Richard said, leading him up the stairs. He took a seat when they entered, glad to see Richard would be doing the same. This was going to be a far longer meeting than his usual ones. "I'll go first. I've no doubt you're eager to hear what I'm about to tell you," Richard said. "Most eager, my friend. The king is well, Barristan, and he has another dragon," Richard said with a smile. "Another one?" "Aye, two. Can you believe it, old friend? 2 dragons, would that Rhaegar was here to see it for himself," Richard said, smiling. Barristan shook his head. 2 dragons, his prince would have been ecstatic. That it was his son who had brought them back, even more so. "But it's not all good news, my friend. It seems the maesters were far more devious than even we knew about. More and more of them wish to see the dragons fall, but our king is on their trail." Prince Oberyn and Tyrion traveled to Old Town and discussed much and more. Suffice to say, Pyxell is untrustworthy. But as of now, so are they all. You know of who. Some of the names, aye, but there is no doubt more. We will find them, Barristan, while Oberyn and Tyrion and the Maester may work their way. My lips will speak the truth. We shall find them all, and they will pay. On this I swear. "We have other issues, my friend," Robert spoke to Lady Catelyn. "They wish to betroth the king's sister to Joffrey," Barristan said, and Richard looked to him. "We expected this, Barristan. It's no problem." "No, they've agreed to it, Richard." "What? Without Stark's say?" "Oh, they've covered it with a promise, and the lady says she'll speak to Lord Stark himself, but I know the stag, Richard, he'll announce this soon," he said, and looked to his friend who was shaking his head. "What else, old friend?" Richard asked. "The lady spends a lot of time with Littlefinger. I've not been able to hear what they speak of, but she's been here almost a week now, and they spend as much time together as she does with anyone." "Oh, I know of what the lady speaks. Trust me. It's well in hand, Richard said. What is it, Richard? He asked, and Richard looked at him before nodding. They mean to kill our king, have hired a man to do so. Why do they still walk, Richard? Why do they still breathe? Because it's for the king to mete out justice, Barristan, not you or I, Richard said, and he shook his head. They mean my king harm, Richard. As a king's guard, it's my duty to protect him. Surely it's best done by putting them both in the ground. It's not just the two, the brother is in on it too, perhaps even the uncle. Brynden? He would not, Richard. No, I'll not believe that, he said angrily. He is their kin, would he not take their part? You know him almost as well as I. Do you think Brynden Tully capable of such a thing? Barristan said. No, you have the right of it. I may need to speak with him, though. I will await the king's response. The assassin! One of my own, Barristan. He'll carry out his orders, fail, and not be seen here again. You'd kill one of your own, Barristan said, shocked. I would if need be. Aye, but I'll have no need of for it. Not for this one, Bronn is far too good a man for that. Bronn the cutthroat? A good cover, is it not? Oh, don't get me wrong, he was when I found him. A man who would cut your throat for coin and not think twice about it, but he's a good man, Barristan. I'd not trust him otherwise. Where is he now? Collecting his gold from one of the brothel keepers. Man's gotta get paid too, after all. Richard said with a laugh. Thank the gods I ran into you when I did. Barristan said, smiling. Oh, you did the running, did you? Richard said with a chuckle, which soon turned into both of them laughing. Once he was finished speaking, he and Richard said their goodbyes. He was off to do his duty, while Richard, no doubt, was off to do his own. He walked back to the Red Keep, wondering about what had been said. Assassins, plots, this was his future. This was life. Now, and he was glad of it. Arriving at White Sword Tower, he found Sir Richard Horp coming off his own duty, the man scowling like he hadn't done for quite some time. Sir Richard, he said, looking at his fellow Kingsguard. Sir Barristan, a word, please. Taking his seat, he waited until Sir Richard began to speak, finding to his dismay the reason for his brother's anger. The Crown Prince had slapped his brother for no reason, pulled his sister's hair when she stood up for the boy. It would have gone further had not Sir Richard and Sir Richard stepped in. Sir Richard telling the prince his mother wished to see him. Now his fellow Kingsguard feared what would happen when the queen realized he'd used her name. When it became clear he'd lied to the prince, for a man who, after seeing what this order had developed into, had almost wished to be dismissed, to now be so worried about that dismissal, proved just how true he was. So Richard doted on the princess, helped her in her little garden, kept her and her brother as far from Joffrey as he could. Should it come to it, Sir Richard, like Sir Jaime before him, would Barristan, had no doubt, stab a king in the back. Certainly, the type of king Joffrey would be. He calmed him down and walked to the Tower of the Hand, walking in on Lord Edmure and Lady Catelyn speaking to Jon Arryn. He waited until they left, the lady seemingly annoyed, though he knew not what about. Instead, once they left, he entered. Lord Hand, we must discuss the Crown Prince. Not now, Sir Barristan. No, my Lord Hand, now it must be. He struck his brother again. His sister, too. It must be brought to the king's attention. If not by you, then by me, he said, looking at the hand of the king. Jon Arryn looked at him almost angrily, but then his expression changed. Something a little more calculating began to form. It bothered Barristan greatly. Though should he be dismissed, he had his own king to support, so he'd let it play out. Come with me, sir. Back up what I say, Jon Arryn said, and he looked to the man and nodded. When they reached the king's quarters, it was surprising to find the man sober. He was also even more surprisingly glad to see them. Jon, Sir Barristan, come in, I was just writing to Ned, Robert said, and they looked to see someone sitting in the corner, quill and parchment in hand. Tell them to leave, your grace. There is something we must discuss, Jon Arryn said, and Robert pouted, before sending the girl away. What's so important? I wish to tell Ned the good news, Jon, Robert said, sitting down. It's about that, Robert. We can't marry Joffrey to Lady Sansa. Jon Arryn said, I'll not have this conversation again, Jon. I'll not give the boy to the roses. He'll marry Ned's girl, and that's the end of it. Sir Barristan, why don't you tell the king what you told me? Standing outside the queen's chambers that night, Barristan felt in dire need of a bath. He actually felt unclean. Jon Arryn cared nothing about the prince and princess. Instead, it was coin he wished for. Willing to sentence the Tyrells Rose to a life of misery with a cruel prince, all to gain a hand on their gold. Thankfully, Robert was too wrapped up in his own fantasy to see anything, too eager to be joined to the Starks. So he had refused to break the betrothal for any reason, even though he had no agreement with the girl's father. He had, however, agreed to allow the Lady Catelyn to broach it with his friend before he announced it. As for Joffrey, well, boys will be boys was the answer he got from the king. He'd speak with him, set him straight, as if that would work. At least he had agreed that the Kingsguard could take the prince and princess away from their brother if they deemed it so needed. That for now would have to be enough. Barristan found himself getting ever more tired. How much longer would he need to be here? How much longer would he have to wait? How much longer would the realm suffer these people? Casterly Rock 2094 AC. Jon, both Rhaegar and Rhaegar were getting far too big for his room. It would be very soon that they'd need to be moved from here. His sister especially needed to stretch her wings. So after he woke up and broke his fast, after he spent some time with Joy, he, Loras, Cregan, and Sorella guessed, Dusk and his guards made their way down to the vaults. Jers and Walder would deal with the doors, while Arthur would join them, the cage being carried between them all. When they walked through the doors and out into the cove, he heard Rhaegar chirp loudly, the bronze dragon eager for his first taste of freedom. His sister was much quieter, though, much more reserved, though Jon could feel her own eagerness, too. "Keep him close, Rinks, this is only a trial run," he said, and his sister laughed. "Of course, little brother, I'll keep him close," she said, and then both dragons chirped as the cage was opened. Watching the two dragons fly, the wolves run around in the sand, hearing the happy yelps from Dusk, the happy chirps from both dragons, he knew what he needed to do. Asking Sarah to watch them, he told them he'd return in a bit, before turning to walk back inside. The vaults were massive, large dark rooms, some lighter than others, but they were numerous and labyrinthine, so he moved from one to another, trying to see a pattern. "Arthur, what do you think?" "My king..." "Could we stay here?" "Jon, surely you don't mean to," Loras, shaking his head. "She's getting too big. She needs the room to grow, the room to see the world. Rhaegar too. And I can't leave them. I can't be apart from them," he said, seeing his friend understand. "Wait, you're moving down here," Cregan said as he realized what they were speaking of. If Arthur thinks it can be done," he said, looking to his knight. "It can be done in some ways. It could actually be better, though you'll need to keep appearances up top too." "The Kingsguard?" he asked. "Go where the king goes," Arthur said, and he nodded his head. They walked back down the corridors, Arthur marking some rooms as good, others as not. Some doors he locked, some he opened. In the end, he found that, since he was coming down here, Cregan wished it too, as did Loras. But he told his friend that just like Arthur said, they needed to keep appearances up top, for now at least. Brian still didn't know the truth, and Jon was fighting himself daily, wondering when and how to tell her. With the decision made, over the next few days they began to prepare the vaults. Jon's room was actually not too bad, Sorella's next to it, and Arthur's facing it. Jon's and Walder would if they wished to have their own rooms too. There would be space for Loras and Brienne at some point, a room to meet in, and some others they could use for storage, and other things. Speaking to Jaime on it, he was told that this is pretty much how the Rock was formed. That while Jon could stay there, he'd also need, though, to stay in the rooms on the family wing too, that appearances couldn't just be that, which he agreed to. Rhaegar was overjoyed, Rhaegar too. They'd have access to fly, to be freer, there would be restrictions of course, but still his sister was happy. And to Jon, that was all that mattered. A few days later, "Move! No quicker!" Arthur shouted as Jon tried to dodge the two men. "Left, Jon, to the left." Jaime shouted and Jon moved there, before seeing an opening. He thrust and spun, catching the man across his thigh, ducking out of the way of the returning strike. The other man caught him, though, and Jon felt the pain of the strike. He'd learn that lesson more quickly next time. He retaliated with a quick set of strikes, forcing the man to back off before his feet were swept from him, and he yielded. When the sword was placed at his neck, "Well done, my prince, you did better today. But not good enough," he said, smirking. "Perhaps tomorrow," the other man said, and he nodded, before turning to see Melisandre smiling at him. Fighting Melisandre's guards had been her suggestion. At first, both Arthur and Jaime had disagreed, but they did eventually allow him to fight them one-on-one. Now, though, he had moved on to fight them both together. He'd yet to take a victory, either fighting one or both. But he was getting better. He could feel it, feel that it was close. Seeing Melisandre's smiles, he was sure she thought so too. "You did well. They fight much different than us. But you fight like them," Arthur said. "I don't understand how," he said, and Jaime nodded. "We all have our styles, Jon. Arthur, Barristan, all of us fight a certain way, which is our own way. You'll see influences. I was trained by Arthur, you by me. They are there. But we have our own uniqueness too. Jaime said, Jaime's right, Jon. Embrace it. Don't fight it. When you're ready, no one will be even close. Except for you two, Jon said, smiling. Not even us, Arthur said, and Jon shook his head. A moon later, they had moved down here a couple of weeks past, Melisandre and her guards, Arpal and Darix joining them too, apart from Loras, Brienne, Joy, and the Lannisters. Everyone he cared for at the Rock basically lived here now. Roshanix and Lygaron were thriving and, according to Sarah, getting ever bigger. Rosiette, especially, Jon thought. His sister perhaps the happiest of all about the move. Even though some nights he couldn't sleep with them, she seemed happier here than she'd ever been in his room. A part of Jon felt guilty at that, thinking he had in some ways stifled her by keeping her in his room, but according to her and Lygaron, it could only be now they moved. This is the right time, brother. This is when it's supposed to be. You must have felt it. Yes, father. Earlier would have been bad. Lygaron said softly in his head. Why, son? It's not what they wished, father. We need to be ready. Who are they? He asked, and Lygaron once again went quiet. Lygaron, he said, and heard his dragon chirp as his sister chirped back at him. He's annoying. We should have left him in the egg. Rosierta said, and Lygaron chirped at her. See, annoying, she said. And Jon laughed despite himself. Moving from the vaults to the family wing and back was hard, simply finding the right times to do so without creating questions. In the end, he found himself getting up even earlier in the mornings, going to sleep even later at night. The tiredness became something he got used to, something he would have dealt with had not Daisy insisted he begin to take naps during the day. It's bad enough that I'm tired all the time and can't sleep because of my discomfort. I'll not have it with you too, Jon, she said as he yawned while breaking their fast. One morning, Sleepy Jon, so sleepy, Joy said, leaning into him as she ate, and he looked at her over-exaggerated yawning and laughed. Really, you too. After all I've done for you, traitor, he said, smirking, when she stuck her tongue out at him. You need your beauty sleep, Jon. I mean, you really do. Look at these eyes. We can't have them, I tell you. No to bed, I say. Joy said, and as funny as it was hearing her impersonate Jenna so well, it was funnier hearing what came next. Lady Joy Hill, how dare you? I do not sound like that, Jaime said, entering the room. She looked to him for rescue. He rolled his eyes and pretended to turn away, but feeling her hand on his arm, he had to step in. It was my fault, Lady Jaina. We were playing a game, he said, and Joy breathed a hugely relieved sigh. You young men are too old for games, and you young lady are not as clever as you think. You may have this one wrapped around your fingers, but I know your games, Jaina said, and Jon had to give it to Joy. She held her laughter well, even if it was only until Jaina left the room. That was the best one yet, she said, almost doubled over once Jaina was gone. He felt strange going to bed that night, felt almost a need to go, not tiredness, but as if he needed to be in bed. As he lay down, he looked to see Lygaron looking at him, Rhaenys already asleep. He reached out with his mind, but the dragon wasn't letting him in, closing his eyes. He swore that the dragon wished him sweet dreams, but whether he did or didn't, he was asleep in moments. He was in a large room full of books, a circular room. Men came in, wearing gray robes, wearing chains. Masters these were masters which could only mean this was the Citadel. He felt the anger rising and moved towards them. Reaching out, he watched as his hand seemed to go through the nearest man, almost as if he wasn't there. They began to grab books and papers, began to pour drinks. Jon tried to memorize their faces, tried to see if he knew any of them, but they all looked the same to him. What news? It seems the dragon may have another spawn on the way. How? What does it matter? We cannot allow it to be born, can we? No, had Paxil deal with it. The voices intermingled so he couldn't see who was speaking, who was answering. The conversation, though, seemed to be the key. Perhaps this won't require our intervention. A simple word may be enough. He realized then he'd not seen it all. Something was missing. No, we must be sure the child cannot live. The mother says no consequence, though, should she fall too. All is for the best. Jon was furious. How dare they speak of his grandmother in such a way? He would find them. He would find them all. If it took him the rest of his life, these men would pay. He was in a building. Hearing screams, he looked around. Dragon banners filled the walls. He moved towards sea sounds. Heard the woman cry out. No Ares. No, please. He moved faster, seeing the two men in front of him, white cloaks flowing behind them as they just stood there. An older man, graying hair and beard, the other younger, neither men he recognized. He moved to the door, hearing the woman scream. He looked at the men, seeing them stand there, neither even bothering to move. Please, Eris, my husband. Is my servant? What care I of him? Now do as your king bids. The screaming went on for some time. Try as he might, he couldn't enter, couldn't save her, whoever she was. He soared through the air, the bronze dragon flying higher and higher, sitting on his back. He looked down. Below him were lands he knew well, colors he remembered. He was in the west, he was home. The rock loomed in front of him, and Jon smiled. The dragon landed on the highest point, taking up residence. It perched, and Jon found himself beside a girl he recognized. Rosier, he said, smiling at his sister. She was his age, a little smaller than him, but seeing her filled his heart with joy. Come, brother, a dragon is being born. She led him down some halls, and he knew where he was. The family wing, the place he called home for 5 or more years. Yami's room, she was taking him to Yami's room. He heard the crying as they neared it, saw the small blonde boy and girl holding each other as their tears fell. He saw Cry shaking his head, saw the tall, balding man shout as he looked at the blood-stained corpse of the woman laying in the bed. He moved into the room, saw the babe laying in the crib, his stunted legs, his mismatched eyes. Look, Jay, a dragon, he heard Rainsea say.